Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Last October, my wife Jennifer and I drove down to the Gulf Coast for our 10th anniversary. We'd been saving up for months, putting away every extra dollar we could find, and finally booked this gorgeous beachfront condo in a small Florida town called Pelican Bay. The rental photos showed floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking pristine white sand, a massive king bed with ocean views, and this charming vintage decor that Jennifer absolutely loved. We arrived on a Sunday afternoon, exhausted from the 8-hour drive but buzzing with excitement. The building was one of those older complexes from the 80s, painted this faded coral pink that had probably been vibrant 30 years ago. The property manager, a guy named Carl with deep-set eyes and fingernails bitten down to the quick, met us in the lobby and handed over the keys while barely making eye contact. The first night was perfect. We opened all the windows, listened to the waves, shared a bottle of wine on the balcony while watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. But around 2 in the morning, I woke up to this smell drifting through the bedroom. It was subtle at first, like maybe a mouse had died in the walls. That sweet, sick odor that makes your throat close up. Jennifer was still asleep, her face peaceful against the pillow. So I got up quietly and checked around the room, sniffing near the baseboards and air vents. The smell seemed strongest near the closet, a walk-in with mirrored doors that reflected the moonlight coming through the windows. I opened it carefully, trying not to wake Jennifer, and the odor hit me like a physical force. Thick, cloying, unmistakably the smell of decay. I grabbed my phone and used the flashlight to look around the closet. It was mostly empty, except for some extra pillows on the top shelf and a few wire hangers that jangled when I brushed against them. The smell was definitely coming from somewhere inside, but I couldn't pinpoint the exact source. The next morning I called Carl while Jennifer was in the shower. He answered on the 6th ring, sounding annoyed that I'd interrupted his Monday morning. When I explained about the smell, he immediately launched into this rehearsed-sounding speech about how the building's plumbing was old, how sometimes the pipes backed up, how the salt air made everything corrode faster than usual. He promised to send someone to check it out when they got a chance, which I knew meant never. Jennifer noticed the smell as soon as she walked into the bedroom that morning, wrinkling her nose and asking if maybe a seagull had gotten trapped in the attic and died. We tried to make the best of it, spending most of Monday on the beach, swimming in the surprisingly warm October water, and hunting for sand dollars along the shoreline. But every time we went back to the condo to grab sunscreen or water, that smell would hit us, getting stronger as the day heated up. By evening, it was unbearable. Jennifer had started getting headaches, and I noticed she kept touching her throat like she was trying not to gag. We moved our suitcases to the living room and decided to sleep on the pull-out couch, keeping the bedroom door shut tight with towels stuffed under the gap. Around midnight, I couldn't stand it anymore. I told Jennifer I was going to take another look in that closet, maybe move things around and find whatever was causing the stench. Armed with my phone's flashlight and a dish rag tied around my nose and mouth, I went back into the bedroom. The smell had gotten so bad that my eyes started watering immediately. In the closet, I pushed aside the hanging clothes rod and started examining the walls more carefully. The back wall had this weird textured wallpaper, like bamboo print from the 70s, peeling at the corners. When I pressed on it, one section felt different, hollow, like there was space behind it. I found a seam in the wallpaper near the floor and started pulling. The paper came away easily, too easily, revealing what looked like a piece of drywall that had been cut and poorly replaced. There were fingerprints in the dried joint compound around the edges, and I could see where someone had done a rushed patch job. The smell was definitely coming from behind this section of wall. I knew I should stop, call the police maybe, or at least wait until morning. But something made me keep going. Maybe it was anger at having our anniversary ruined, or maybe just the need to know what was causing this nightmare. I went to the kitchen and found a butter knife, then came back and started prying at the edges of the drywall patch. It popped out after a few minutes of work, revealing a dark cavity about 3 feet wide and 2 feet deep. The smell that rushed out made me stumble backward, retching into the dish rag. I had to sit on the bed for a minute, breathing through my mouth and fighting the urge to vomit. When I finally worked up the courage to shine my light into the hole, I saw wrapped bundles like packages wrapped in clear plastic and duct tape, stacked carefully in the space. The packages were different sizes, some long and narrow, others round and compact, all wrapped meticulously in layers of plastic sheeting. Through the semi-transparent wrapping, I could make out dark mottled shapes inside. One package near the front had torn slightly, probably from age or heat, and something pale was visible through the gap. I leaned closer, holding my breath, and that's when I saw it. A human hand, gray-green with decomposition, the fingers curled into a claw. The wedding ring was still on the 4th finger, a simple gold band that caught the light from my phone. I scrambled backward so fast I knocked over the nightstand, sending the lamp crashing to the floor. Jennifer called out from the living room, asking if I was okay, but I couldn't form words. I just stood there, staring at that hole in the wall, my mind trying to process what I'd found. I must have stood there for 5 minutes before my brain kicked back into gear. I took photos of everything, the hole, the packages, the visible hand, then carefully replaced the drywall piece, though my fingers were trembling so badly I could barely hold it in place. I walked out to the living room trying to keep my face neutral and told Jennifer we needed to leave immediately. She started asking questions, but something in my expression must have scared her because she stopped mid-sentence and started packing. While she threw our things into suitcases, I called 911 from the balcony, speaking in a low voice so she wouldn't hear the details. The dispatcher kept asking me to repeat myself, like she couldn't believe what I was saying. They told us to get out of the condo and wait in our car, that officers were on their way. The police arrived in force, 3 patrol cars, then detectives, then crime scene technicians in white suits who sealed off the entire building. We sat in our car for hours, watching officers go in and out, their faces grim. A detective named Hoffman, a tall woman with prematurely gray hair pulled into a tight bun, interviewed us separately. She asked about Carl, about when we'd booked the rental, about whether we'd noticed anything else unusual. I mentioned Carl's nervous behavior, how quickly he'd dismissed the smell, and she wrote everything down in a small spiral notebook. Around 3 in the morning, they brought Carl in for questioning. I watched him in the back of the patrol car, his head down, shoulders shaking. Jennifer kept asking me what I'd found, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth yet. I just held her hand and said the police would explain everything. Hoffman came back to our car around sunrise with an update that made everything infinitely worse. They'd found 7 bodies in various states of decomposition, all wrapped and hidden in different spots throughout the building, inside walls, under floorboards, in sealed sections of the attic. The oldest remains were from about 8 years ago, the newest maybe 6 months. All were renters who had supposedly checked out early or left without notice, according to the rental records. Carl had been the property manager for 12 years, living in a unit on the ground floor, keeping meticulous records of every guest. She said he'd been surprisingly cooperative once they'd confronted him with the evidence, almost relieved to be caught. The victims were people traveling alone, or couples without family checking in on them regularly, people whose disappearances wouldn't immediately raise alarms. The investigation took over the entire town. News vans arrived before noon, reporters interviewing anyone who'd ever stayed at the complex. Jennifer and I gave our statements at the police station, a squat concrete building that smelled like burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant. They put us up in a hotel 20 miles away, comped by the city, while they processed the crime scene. I finally told Jennifer everything while we sat on the hotel bed, both of us still in the clothes we'd been wearing for 36 hours. She cried, then got angry, then cried again. We tried to eat but couldn't keep anything down. The detective called us 2 days later to say they'd identified 3 of the victims through dental records and DNA. a traveling nurse from Oregon, a retired teacher from Canada, and a young couple from Japan who'd been on their honeymoon. The other victims were still being processed. Carl had confessed to everything, claiming the first death was an accident during a robbery, and the rest were to cover it up, though the detectives believed he'd been lying about his motives. We drove home in complete silence, stopping only for gas and bathroom breaks. Jennifer hasn't been able to sleep in our own bedroom since we got back. She says she can still smell that odor, even though I've told her it's impossible. We've both been in therapy, trying to process what happened, but some things just don't fit into neat psychological boxes. The detective called last month to tell us Carl had been sentenced to life without parole, that all the victims had finally been identified and their families notified. She thanked us for our help, said we'd brought closure to a lot of people. But closure feels like the wrong word when I still wake up at 2 in the morning, convinced I can smell that sweet, sick stench drifting through our house. Jennifer wants us to renew our vows next year, to reclaim our anniversary from this nightmare. I agreed, but we're going to the mountains this time, somewhere far from the ocean, somewhere with no closets to hide secrets, somewhere we can pretend that people don't do unspeakable things in places meant for making memories. The rental car's GPS had been acting weird for the past hour, but my wife Jessica and I didn't really mind getting lost in the French countryside that August afternoon. We were 2 weeks into our anniversary trip, driving through those endless sunflower fields between Lyon and Avignon, taking whatever back roads looked interesting. I was 34 then, teaching high school history in Denver, and Jess was running her online jewelry business. We'd saved for 3 years for this trip, and honestly, getting away from the tourist spots was exactly what we wanted. Around 4 in the afternoon, we spotted this incredible abandoned farmhouse set back from the road, all weathered stone and collapsed wooden beams, with wildflowers growing through what used to be windows. The light was hitting it just right, that golden European summer light photographers go crazy for, and Jess immediately grabbed her camera from the back seat. We pulled over onto this dirt patch beside the road, maybe 50 yards from the farmhouse. The whole area was dead quiet except for some cicadas buzzing in the heat. While Jess was adjusting her camera settings, I noticed there was actually a newer metal shed about 100 feet behind the old farmhouse. One of those prefab agricultural storage buildings that looked completely out of place next to all that ancient stone. 2 beat-up white vans were parked beside it, both with mud-caked license plates, and the shed's door was propped open with a concrete block. I was about to point it out to Jess when movement caught my eye. 2 men emerged from that shed, and they were dragging something between them, something wrapped in a blue industrial tarp that must have been 7 feet long and obviously heavy from how they were struggling with it. The guy in front was massive, wearing a stained yellow work shirt, bald with these thick red hands gripping the tarp. The other one was skinnier, younger maybe, in dirty jeans and a baseball cap, walking backwards and breathing hard from the effort. At first, my brain tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe they were moving old equipment or disposing of some farming supplies. But there was something about how carefully they were moving, how they kept glancing around between steps, that made my chest tighten. The tarp had these dark, wet patches seeping through in places, and when the skinny one adjusted his grip, part of it fell open for just a second. I saw something pale, like flesh, before he quickly tucked it back. That's when they noticed us. The bald one stopped mid-step and just stared directly at our car. He said something sharp to his partner, who spun around so fast he almost dropped his end. For maybe 5 seconds, nobody moved. Jess was still fiddling with her camera, completely oblivious, talking about the afternoon shadows on the farmhouse walls. The 2 men slowly lowered whatever they were carrying to the ground, right there in the tall grass between the shed and a grove of scraggly olive trees. The bald one reached into the shed and came out with a shovel, one of those long-handled spades with a pointed tip. He handed another one to his partner, who took it without ever taking his eyes off our car. Then they started walking toward us, Not running, not even walking fast. Just this steady, purposeful stride through the yellow grass. The younger one had pulled his cap down low, but I could see his mouth moving like he was talking to himself, or maybe praying. The bald one's face was completely blank, emotionless, like someone heading out to do a chore they'd done 100 times before. They were maybe 70 yards away when Jess finally looked up and saw them. She lowered her camera slowly and grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. "Nathan," she whispered, "get in the car right now." Her voice had this controlled panic that made my whole body go rigid. I fumbled with the keys, dropping them once before managing to start the engine. The men were maybe 40 yards away now, and the bald one had shifted his grip on the shovel, holding it more like a weapon than a tool. Jess was already buckled in, her camera forgotten on the floor, repeatedly checking that her door was locked. The car started on the second try, and I threw it into drive, spraying gravel as we lurched forward. In the rearview mirror, I saw them stop walking and just stand there in the middle of the road watching us leave. The younger one dropped his shovel and ran back toward the vans, and that's when real fear hit me. They were going to follow us. The road ahead curved through dense woods, and I had no idea where it led or how far the next town was. Our rental Peugeot wasn't exactly built for speed, and those vans looked like they knew these roads. I pushed the accelerator harder, taking the curves way too fast, the tires squealing against the hot asphalt. Jess had her phone out trying to call the police, but we had no signal. She kept hitting redial over and over, her breathing getting more frantic each time it failed. About 2 minutes later, I saw white metal in the mirror coming up fast. Just one van, but it was gaining on us. The road narrowed ahead, barely wide enough for 2 cars, with drainage ditches on both sides. I knew if they got alongside us, they could force us off into those ditches. My mind was racing through options that all seemed impossible. Turn around. No room. Pull over and run into the woods. They'd catch us in seconds. Keep driving and hope we reached civilization first. The van was close enough now that I could see the bald one driving, his face still wearing that same blank expression. He wasn't even trying to ram us or run us off the road, just staying right on our bumper, patient, like he knew exactly how this would end. Then Jess did something I'll never forget. She turned around in her seat, pointed her camera at the van behind us, and started taking pictures. The flash went off repeatedly, lighting up the interior of our car like lightning strikes. "Evidence," she kept saying through gritted teeth. "We need evidence." The bald man's expression finally changed when that flash hit him. He raised one hand to shield his eyes, and the van swerved slightly. That's when I saw our chance. There was a sharp left turn coming up, barely visible through the trees marked by an old stone cross. I didn't signal, didn't brake, just yanked the wheel hard at the last second. We went into that turn on 2 wheels, Jess screaming, stuff flying everywhere in the car. The van shot past the turn, brakes shrieking, trying to stop. By the time he'd reversed and made the turn, we'd gained maybe 30 seconds. The new road was even narrower, climbing steeply through thick forest. But up ahead I could see buildings, actual houses with cars parked outside and laundry hanging on lines. We burst into what turned out to be a small village, maybe 20 houses clustered around an old church. I pulled right up to what looked like a cafe, where a group of old men were sitting outside playing cards. We practically fell out of the car, Jess still clutching her camera, both of us probably looking absolutely insane. I tried to explain in my broken French what had happened, showing them the direction we'd come from. One of the old men, wearing suspenders and a faded blue cap, stood up immediately and walked to the middle of the street, standing there with his arms crossed. Within maybe a minute, 5 or 6 other villagers had joined him, forming this human barrier across the road. When the white van came around the corner moments later and saw them all standing there, it slowed, stopped, and then reversed back the way it came. The old man walked over to us, put a weathered hand on my shoulder, and in accented English said, "Those men, they are known here. You were lucky to find us. Come inside now." Inside the cafe, the owner's wife brought us water and strong coffee while her husband called the police. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the cup. The old man, whose name was Philippe, sat with us and explained in halting English mixed with French that those men operated from that abandoned farm, had been suspected of things for years, but nobody could prove anything. People disappear sometimes, he said quietly. Hikers, tourists who camp alone. The police search, but... He shrugged in that way that meant everything and nothing. Jess showed him the pictures on her camera. She'd managed to get 3 clear shots: the van's license plate, the bald man's face through the windshield, and 1 blurry image of both men standing by the shed before we fled. Philippe looked at them for a long moment, then called over 2 other men from the village. They spoke in rapid French, voices getting louder, angrier. One of them, a younger guy in work clothes, pulled out his phone and made a call. Within 20 minutes, 2 police cars arrived, followed by a 3rd unmarked vehicle. The rest of that day became a blur of police statements, translators, and waiting. They took Jess's camera as evidence, gave us receipts, contact information. 2 officers escorted us back to our hotel in Avignon, followed us right to the parking garage to make sure we got there safely. The detective, a woman with short gray hair and tired eyes, told us they'd been investigating similar incidents for 3 years, but this was the first time anyone had gotten photos, the first time witnesses had gotten away to report it immediately. She said they were heading to the farm right then with a full team. We spent that night in our hotel room with chairs pushed against the door, taking turns staying awake, jumping at every sound in the hallway. The next morning, the detective called our room. They'd found the tarp, she said, with traces of blood and evidence of recent digging in the olive grove. The men were gone, the vans were gone, but they had the photos. They had names now, and there was already a manhunt across 3 regions. We cut our trip short, flew home 2 days later. For weeks afterward, I'd wake up in cold sweats, seeing that bald man's empty face in my dreams, that steady walk through the tall grass with the shovel. Jess couldn't look at her photography equipment for months. The French police stayed in contact through email, sending updates when they could. 6 weeks after we got home, we received a call from the detective. They'd caught them, both men, trying to cross into Spain with fake papers. In the younger one's van, they found rope, tarps, shovels, and other things she wouldn't specify over the phone. The investigation had linked them to at least 4 missing persons cases over 5 years. She said our photos, our escape, and most importantly, us leading them to that village where witnesses saw everything, had been the break they needed. The trial would take months, maybe years, but they had them. We'd have to testify eventually, probably by video link, but for now we were safe. She thanked us for our courage, though I told her it wasn't courage, just pure terror and luck that got us to that village. It's been 2 years now since that afternoon in the French countryside. Jess started taking pictures again, but only in cities, only in crowds. We don't do road trips anymore. Don't stop at scenic spots along empty roads. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if we'd been just a little slower, if that turn hadn't been there, if that village hadn't existed. The detective emailed us after the trial concluded. Both men got life sentences. They'd found remains at 3 different locations, all near abandoned farms they'd been using. She said we were the only witnesses who'd ever gotten away. Philippe from the village sent us a message through the police, saying the cafe owner wanted us to know we'd always have a place at his table if we ever came back. We won't. Some places, some moments, they change you permanently. I still see that empty road sometimes when I close my eyes, feel that van right on our bumper, patient and certain. But we survived. We got away. And because of Jess's quick thinking with that camera, those men will never drag anything wrapped in a tarp ever again. The 4 of us were heading up to my uncle's cabin in the mountains that Friday night in early September. I was 24, fresh out of college, working my first real job at an accounting firm in Phoenix. My buddy Kevin was driving his Jeep Cherokee, with his girlfriend Ashley in the passenger seat. and me and my roommate Brandon in the back. We'd planned this weekend getaway for months, desperately needing a break from the city heat and our mind-numbing routines. The cabin sat about 3 hours north, nestled deep in the pine forests where cell service basically didn't exist. Kevin had suggested we leave after work to avoid traffic, which meant we wouldn't hit the mountain roads until well past 10 at night. None of us minded, though. We were young, excited, and had a cooler full of beer and enough junk food to last us through Sunday. The first 2 hours flew by with us singing along to old songs, telling stupid jokes, and Ashley occasionally grabbing the wheel when Kevin tried to air drum to his favorite parts. Once we turned off the interstate onto Highway 87, things got quieter. The road narrowed to 2 lanes and the streetlights disappeared completely. Our headlights carved through pitch-black darkness, with towering pines creating walls on both sides of the asphalt. Brandon had fallen asleep against the window, snoring softly, and Ashley was scrolling through her downloaded Netflix episodes since we'd lost signal about 20 minutes back. I remember staring out at the darkness, catching glimpses of reflective eyes, probably deer or elk, disappearing into the forest as we passed. The temperature had dropped from 90 to maybe 60 degrees, and Kevin had turned the heat on low, making everyone drowsy. We still had about 40 minutes of winding mountain roads ahead of us, and I was fighting to keep my eyes open, thinking about that cold beer waiting for us at the cabin. Around 10:45, we came around a sharp bend, and Kevin hit the brakes hard enough to jolt everyone awake. About 50 yards ahead, a dark blue minivan sat diagonally across both lanes with its hazard lights blinking in that steady, hypnotic rhythm. The vehicle looked older, maybe early 2000s, with rust eating through the wheel wells and a cracked rear window held together with duct tape. Kevin slowed to maybe 15 miles per hour, scanning for a way around it. The shoulder on the right dropped off into a steep ravine, and the left side pressed against a rocky cliff face. Ashley sat up straighter, asking if we should help, assuming it was a breakdown. Something about the scene made my chest tighten. The van's engine was still running. I could see exhaust fumes drifting in our headlights, and both front doors hung wide open like wings. No one stood near the vehicle waving for help, no flashlight beams searching for whatever problem had caused them to stop. The forest around us had gone completely silent, not even the usual cricket chirps or owl calls you'd expect on a warm September night. Kevin inched forward, trying to see if he could squeeze past on the narrow shoulder, when movement caught my eye near the tree line. 2 figures stepped out from behind thick pine trunks on opposite sides of the road, maybe 20 feet from the van. The one on the left was tall and lanky, wearing what looked like dirty work coveralls, carrying something long in his right hand, maybe a tire iron or a piece of rebar. The other guy was shorter but built thick, with a baseball cap pulled low, and what was definitely a wooden baseball bat resting on his shoulder. They moved slowly, deliberately, like they had all the time in the world, their faces hidden in shadow beyond our headlight beams. Brandon grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks, and Ashley made this small whimpering sound that I'll never forget. Kevin didn't need anyone to tell him what to do. He slammed the Jeep into reverse, tires squealing against the asphalt as we flew backward into the darkness, the transmission whining from the sudden strain. The problem with mountain roads is that they're not designed for driving in reverse at 40 miles per hour. Kevin kept his eyes glued to the rear-view mirror while I twisted around to help guide him, shouting warnings about the curves coming up. The Jeep fishtailed dangerously close to the guardrail, and I could hear gravel spraying up into the undercarriage. Behind us, or in front of us now, the minivan's headlights suddenly blazed to life, high beams cutting through the night like searchlights. The engine roared as it straightened out and started following us. Those 2 men must have jumped in fast because within seconds that beat-up van was gaining on us, close enough that I could make out the spider web of cracks across its windshield. Ashley was screaming at Kevin to go faster. Brandon was frantically trying to get his phone to work, holding it up toward the window like that would magically give us signal. The van stayed maybe 10 feet from our front bumper, swerving whenever Kevin swerved, matching our speed perfectly like some twisted game of tag, where we all knew what would happen if they actually caught us. After what felt like hours but was probably 90 seconds, we reached a slightly wider section where the road had been cut into the mountainside for a scenic overlook. Kevin cranked the wheel hard, spinning us around in a move that would have been impressive if we weren't all certain we were about to die. The Jeep's tires screamed and smoked as we did a complete 180, narrowly missing the stone barrier that separated the overlook from a 500-foot drop. Now facing the right direction, Kevin floored it, the engine roaring as we shot forward. The minivan tried to follow our maneuver but wasn't as lucky. They overshot the turn and had to stop completely to avoid going over the edge, giving us maybe a 30-second lead. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might crack my ribs, and I could taste copper in my mouth from biting my tongue during that spin. We flew through the darkness at speeds that would have been insane even in broad daylight, taking curves without slowing down, feeling the Jeep lift slightly on two wheels more than once. The minivan reappeared in our mirrors about 2 minutes later, and this time they weren't alone. A second set of headlights had joined them, a pickup truck from what I could tell, riding right beside the van like they were in formation. They knew these roads better than us. That much was obvious from how they navigated the curves without losing speed. Kevin was pushing the Cherokee to its absolute limit, the speedometer hovering around 75 on roads meant for 35. And still they gained on us inch by inch. Ashley had gone quiet, her knuckles white from gripping the dashboard, while Brandon kept muttering prayers under his breath, and he hadn't been to church since middle school. The check engine light started flashing, probably from the abuse we were putting the vehicle through, and I could smell burning rubber mixing with hot metal. Every shadow could hide another vehicle waiting to cut us off. Every straight stretch of road felt like a trap about to spring. The forest flew by in a blur of black and green, our headlights barely illuminating the road fast enough for Kevin to react to the curves ahead. Then Brandon shouted something that made everyone's head snap toward him. He had one bar of signal. His fingers fumbled with the phone as he dialed 911, nearly dropping it when we hit a pothole that sent us airborne for a second. The call connected just as we saw lights ahead. Not vehicle lights, but building lights. A gas station, one of those old mom-and-pop places that somehow survived in the middle of nowhere, its neon beer signs flickering in the window. Kevin didn't slow down until the last possible second, cranking the wheel so hard that we skidded sideways into the parking lot, stopping inches from the gas pumps. Brandon was screaming our location into the phone while we all turned to watch the road. The minivan and pickup truck slowed as they passed, not stopping but not speeding away either, like predators deciding if their prey was worth entering unfamiliar territory for. Through the gas station's dirty windows, I could see the elderly owner reaching for something under his counter. Hopefully, a phone, maybe something else. The vehicles made 2 more slow passes while we huddled in that fluorescent island of safety. Brandon still on with dispatch before finally disappearing into the night. The state police arrived 23 minutes later. I know because I watched every second tick by on the gas station's old Coca-Cola clock. 2 cruisers pulled up with their lights flashing but sirens off, and the officers took our statements while we stood there shaking despite the warm night air. The elderly store owner, a Vietnam vet named Frank with faded tattoos covering his forearms, told the cops this wasn't the first time he'd seen something like this. Apparently, there'd been 3 similar incidents over the past 2 months, always late at night, always targeting out-of-towners heading up to vacation cabins. The officers had us describe everything we could remember: the van's broken window, the tall man's coveralls, the pickup truck that joined the chase. They wrote it all down, gave us a case number, and told us they'd escort us back to Phoenix if we wanted. Kevin's Jeep was making unhealthy grinding noises by then, probably needed a new transmission after what we'd put it through. Ashley hadn't stopped crying since we'd pulled into the gas station, and Brandon's hand still shook as he tried to drink the coffee Frank had given us for free. We didn't go to the cabin that weekend. The police followed us all the way back to the interstate, and we drove home in complete silence except for the grinding sound from the Jeep's engine. None of us wanted to talk about how close we'd come to whatever those men had planned, or think about what might have happened if that gas station hadn't been there. Kevin had to replace his transmission, cost him $3,000 he didn't have. but he said it was the best money he'd ever spent. The detective assigned to our case called a few weeks later to tell us they'd found the van abandoned and burned about 15 miles from where we'd encountered it. No plates, VIN number filed off. They never found the men or the pickup truck. He said we were lucky, that most people who stopped for vehicles blocking those mountain roads didn't make it to a gas station to tell their story. I haven't driven through mountains at night since then. Don't care if it means leaving at 4 a.m. or paying for a motel room to wait until daylight. The whole thing lasted maybe 15 minutes from when we first saw the van until we reached the gas station, but it rearranged something fundamental in how I see the world. I used to think danger was something that happened in bad neighborhoods or war zones, not on scenic mountain highways where families go camping and couples take romantic weekend trips. Brandon moved back to his parents' house in Iowa 2 months after that night. Said he couldn't handle living somewhere so isolated anymore. Ashley and Kevin broke up not long after. She blamed him for taking that route. He blamed himself for suggesting we leave at night, and neither of them could get past what happened. I still see Kevin sometimes at the grocery store or getting gas, and we nod at each other but never talk about that night. There's this unspoken understanding that we survived something together, but acknowledging it out loud would make it too real again, would bring back the taste of copper and the sound of Ashley's whimpering and the sight of those two figures stepping out from the trees like they owned the darkness itself. I found out later from Frank's nephew, who works at the auto parts store where Kevin got his transmission fixed, that the old man had a shotgun under that counter and would have used it if those men had tried to follow us into his parking lot. He'd been robbed twice when he first opened the station 40 years ago and decided he'd never be a victim again. Sometimes I think about those other people the detective mentioned, the ones who didn't make it to a gas station, and I wonder if they had families still searching for answers, still driving those mountain roads in daylight looking for any sign of what happened. The police theorized it was either a robbery scheme or something worse, maybe connected to drug trafficking through those isolated corridors. But without catching anyone, it was all just speculation. All I know for certain is that we were meant to stop that night, meant to get out of our vehicle for whatever reason those men had planned, and the only thing that saved us was Kevin's instinct to reverse instead of trying to help. That split-second decision, that basic animal recognition of a trap, that's what separated us from becoming another unsolved case file in some detective's drawer. And that's why I'm sharing this story here, hoping maybe it'll help someone else recognize the signs, trust their gut when every rational part of their brain is saying to be a good person and help someone in need on a dark road. Most people think budget trips are just about cheap hostels and instant noodles, but mine turned into something I still can't talk about without feeling sick. I was 21, finishing my junior year at college in Michigan, and my roommates convinced me to join them for spring break in Charleston. We found this apartment rental through some sketchy website that promised authentic local living for half the price of hotels. The place was on King Street, right above a vintage clothing store that blasted jazz music until midnight. 4 of us crammed into a 2-bedroom walk-up with peeling yellow wallpaper and a kitchen that smelled permanently like old grease. But we didn't care. We were there to explore the city, hit the beaches, and drink overpriced cocktails we couldn't afford. The trouble started on our 3rd night there, a Wednesday in early March, when the air was still cool enough to need a jacket after sunset. We'd spent the day walking through the historic district, taking those stupid tourist photos where you pretend to hold up old church steeples between your fingers. My friends, Megan, Sophia, and Claire, wanted to try this seafood place everyone on Instagram was raving about. The restaurant was maybe 15 minutes from our rental, one of those trendy spots with exposed brick walls and Edison bulb lighting. We stayed longer than planned because Claire started flirting with our waiter, this guy with sleeve tattoos, who kept bringing us free appetizers. By the time we left, it was past 11, and the streets had that eerie emptiness that tourist areas get after the shops close. Walking back, we were loud and giggly, our voices echoing off the shuttered storefronts. Sophia kept doing this terrible impression of the waiter's southern accent, and Megan was filming everything on her phone for her travel vlog that maybe 12 people watched. The vintage store beneath our apartment was dark, its mannequins looking creepy behind the glass, dressed in 70s polyester suits. I remember noticing our apartment windows were lit up, all of them, even the bathroom we always kept dark because the overhead bulb was too harsh. My first thought was that Claire, who'd been complaining about the electricity bill already, would throw a fit about someone leaving everything on. The street door to our stairwell was propped open with a brick, which wasn't unusual since the lock had been broken when we arrived and the landlord said he'd fix it, eventually. But when we climbed those narrow stairs, the wood creaking under our weight like it always did, I saw our apartment door was wrong. The door frame around the lock was splintered, long pale scratches in the dark wood like someone had jammed something metal in there and twisted hard. The door itself was open maybe 6 inches, and through the gap, I could hear movement, drawers sliding, papers rustling, the specific sound of someone going through things that weren't theirs. Megan grabbed my wrist so tight her acrylic nails left marks that lasted for days. We all went completely silent, that kind of silence where you can hear your own heartbeat and everyone else's breathing. Through that gap, I could see a shadow moving across the living room wall, too tall and broad to be anyone we knew. Claire started backing down the stairs, but the old wood betrayed us with a groan that sounded like a scream in the quiet hallway. The movement inside stopped immediately. We heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming toward the door. I wanted to run, every instinct screaming at me to get out, but my legs wouldn't work right, like those nightmares where you need to escape but can't move fast enough. The door swung open wider and there he was, a man in a faded denim jacket with oil stains on the sleeves, maybe 40 years old, with this patchy beard and eyes that were too wide, too bright, like he was high on something. He had Sophia's makeup bag in one hand, the expensive one her mom bought her for Christmas, and lipsticks were spilling out onto the floor, rolling toward our feet like bloody little bullets. He didn't run when he saw us, which was somehow worse than if he had. Instead, he smiled, not a normal smile, but this slow stretch of his mouth that showed teeth that were mostly gold caps and gaps. "Well," he said, and his voice was weirdly calm, almost friendly, with this thick Carolina drawl, "Y'all are back early." He stepped into the doorway, filling it completely, and I realized the only way out was through him. The stairwell was too narrow to squeeze past, and behind us was nothing but a 3-story drop to concrete. He kept talking, casual as anything, about how the door was already broken when he got there, how he was just looking for his girlfriend's stuff. She used to live here, maybe we knew her. His free hand kept moving to his jacket pocket, patting something there, something with weight that made the fabric hang wrong. Sophia was the first to find her voice, though it came out high and tight. "Take whatever you want," she said. "We won't call anyone, just please leave." But he laughed at that, this wheezing sound like an old car trying to start, and took a step toward us. We all moved back in unison, pressed against each other on that narrow landing. The stairs behind us creaked dangerously. These weren't built for 4 people standing in the same spot. He started describing the apartment's layout, proving he'd been through everything. Knew about Claire's hidden cash in the tampon box, Megan's prescription bottles in the nightstand, my laptop under the couch cushions where I thought it was safe. He knew which bed each of us slept in, said he could tell by the perfume on the pillows. That detail made my whole body go numb, thinking about this stranger smelling our pillows, touching our sheets, going through our dirty laundry. Then we heard it, sirens getting closer. Not because anyone called them, but Charleston police were always circling the tourist areas at night. His whole demeanor changed instantly, that fake friendliness dropping away like a mask. "You little bitches called them?" he snarled, spit flying from his mouth. Megan, brave stupid Megan, held up her phone. She'd been recording the whole time, live streaming to her Instagram. "Everyone's watching," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "My followers already called 911. It was a lie. She had maybe 50 followers and the video was just recording locally. But he didn't know that. He lunged forward, trying to grab the phone, and that's when Claire did something I'll never forget. She had her keys between her fingers and she swung hard, catching him across the cheek, leaving 3 parallel gashes that immediately started bleeding. He stumbled back, cursing, his hand flying to his face, and that gave us our opening. We rushed forward all at once, a tangle of bodies and screaming. I remember slamming into his shoulder the smell of him, sweat and something chemical, like paint thinner. Sophia grabbed the stair railing and used it to swing herself around him. Claire kept hitting him with her keys, wild and desperate. Megan threw Sophia's makeup bag at his head, and powder exploded everywhere, turning the air pink and glittery. For a few seconds it was pure chaos. Him trying to grab us fighting to get past. Everyone shouting. His hand caught my hair and yanked hard enough that I heard strands ripping out. But I twisted away, leaving him with a fistful of blonde while I tumbled down the stairs after my friends. We burst onto the street just as a police cruiser was passing. Megan ran straight into traffic, waving her arms, nearly getting hit by the car as it screeched to a stop. The officer got out, hand on his weapon, probably thinking we were drunk college kids causing trouble. But then he saw our faces. Claire had blood on her keys and hands. My scalp was bleeding where hair had been torn out. We were all covered in pink powder and crying. Behind us, we could hear the man crashing through the apartment, and then the fire escape clanging. The officer called for backup immediately while pushing us behind his vehicle. 2 more cruisers arrived within minutes, but when they searched the apartment and surrounding blocks, he was gone. All they found was our ransacked belongings, a meth pipe in the bathroom that wasn't ours, and a backpack full of stolen items from other vacation rentals in the area. The police took our statements until almost 4 in the morning, and the detective, this exhausted-looking woman named Officer Paulson, told us this had been happening all month. The guy targeted vacation rentals specifically because tourists rarely pressed charges. They just wanted to go home. She showed us security footage from the vintage store below, and there he was from 2 days earlier, testing our street door during daylight, pretending to browse the shop while actually casing the building. We'd probably walked right past him. The landlord finally showed up around dawn, reeking of bourbon, and had the nerve to blame us for leaving valuables in the apartment. He wouldn't even pay for a hotel, said the apartment was still technically habitable. We spent the rest of the night in the living room, all 4 of us in a pile on the couch, taking turns staying awake while the others dozed. Every sound made us jump, the jazz music starting up again downstairs, a cat on the fire escape, drunk people arguing on the street. We left Charleston that same day, driving straight through to Michigan in Megan's beat-up Toyota, stopping only for gas and drive-through coffee. None of us talked about it during the ride, just played music too loud and pretended to sleep. But I know we were all thinking the same thing, about him knowing which bed was whose, about what he might have done if we'd come back alone, or if we'd been asleep when he broke in. The police never caught him, though Officer Paulson emailed me a few weeks later saying they'd connected him to 7 other break-ins. Claire needed therapy for months afterward, and Sophia still can't stay in ground-floor apartments. As for me, I check every lock 3 times before bed, and I've never used a vacation rental again. Hotels might be expensive, but at least they have security cameras and deadbolts that actually work. The worst vacation of my life happened 2 years ago at what was supposed to be a paradise in Barbados. My husband Tom and I had saved for months to afford 5 nights at the Crystal Sands Resort, one of those places where everything's included and you're not supposed to worry about anything except which cocktail to order next. We'd been married for 7 years, and between his job at the warehouse and my shifts at the hospital, we desperately needed this break. The brochures showed pristine beaches, smiling staff, and couples lounging by infinity pools. What they didn't show was how isolated the resort actually was, 40 minutes from the nearest town, surrounded by nothing but jungle and a single winding road that connected it to civilization. Our room was on the 3rd floor of the Sunset Wing, room 312, facing the ocean but requiring a long walk through multiple corridors to reach the main areas. Everything seemed perfect that first afternoon when we arrived around 2 o'clock. The lobby had marble floors that gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the staff greeted us with champagne and cold towels. After checking in, we changed into our swimsuits and headed straight for the main pool, a massive lagoon-shaped thing with a swim-up bar and underwater speakers playing reggae music. That's when I first noticed him. A heavy-set man, probably in his 40s, sitting alone at the poolside bar nursing what looked like whiskey on the rocks, while everyone else had tropical drinks with umbrellas. He wore expensive-looking sunglasses and a gold chain that caught the sun. But what made me uncomfortable was how he kept adjusting his position on the bar stool to face wherever I moved in the pool. Tom was doing laps, completely oblivious while I tried to enjoy floating on a pool raft, but every time I glanced toward the bar, those sunglasses were pointed directly at me. Around 4:30, I decided to get out and dry off on one of the lounge chairs near the shallow end. Tom joined me, and we ordered piña coladas from a waiter who seemed to appear out of nowhere. They were really attentive at this place. The man at the bar had shifted again, now facing our direction even though it meant turning his back to the bartender. He had this way of pretending to check his phone while obviously watching us, holding it at an angle that didn't match someone actually reading a screen. When our drinks arrived, I mentioned it quietly to Tom, who turned to look just as the guy quickly swiveled back toward the bar. "Probably just drunk," Tom said, squeezing my hand. "These all-inclusive places, people start drinking at breakfast. But drunk people usually have trouble focusing on anything for long, and this man had been laser-focused on me for over an hour. His drink level never seemed to change either, like he was nursing it just to have an excuse to stay at that particular spot. The thing that really unsettled me was when I went to use the bathroom near the pool area. The women's room was down a little hallway past the towel station, and as I walked there, I heard footsteps behind me matching my pace exactly. When I sped up slightly, they sped up. When I stopped to pretend to check my phone, they stopped too. I spun around and there he was, about 20 feet back, suddenly very interested in a potted palm tree. He had taken off his sunglasses and his eyes were this pale gray color like dirty ice. Without the shades, I could see his face clearly. Weathered skin with deep lines around his mouth, a thin scar through his left eyebrow, and this peculiar way of breathing through his mouth that made his jaw hang slightly open. I practically ran into the bathroom and stayed there for 10 minutes, hoping he'd be gone when I came out. He was, but when I got back to the pool, he was at his spot at the bar again, sunglasses back on, facing my empty lounge chair like he'd been waiting for me to return. We left the pool area around 6 to get ready for dinner. The resort had 5 restaurants, and we'd made reservations at the steakhouse on the 2nd floor of the main building. Walking back to our room, I kept checking behind us, but the corridors were empty except for a few housekeeping carts. Tom thought I was being paranoid, but he humored me by double-checking that our door locked properly, and even putting the chain on while we showered and changed. The sunset wing was designed in this confusing way where you had to walk through 3 different corridors and pass 2 emergency stairwells to get from the elevators to our room. The hallways had this thick burgundy carpet that muffled footsteps completely, and the lighting was dim, just these small sconces every few feet that created more shadows than illumination. Every room door looked identical, dark wood with gold numbers, and there were no windows in the corridors, making it feel like a maze. I remember thinking how easy it would be to get lost if you'd been drinking, how all the turns looked the same. Dinner started off perfectly normal. The restaurant was beautiful, all white tablecloths and candlelight, with windows overlooking the beach where you could see the moon reflecting off the water. We ordered wine and were halfway through our appetizers when I saw him again, seated alone at a table in the corner, partially hidden behind a decorative plant. This time he wasn't wearing sunglasses, and he'd changed into a white linen shirt that looked expensive but had yellow stains under the arms. He was cutting his steak in this methodical way, taking tiny bites while staring directly at our table. The waiter came by and asked if everything was all right because I'd stopped eating. And when I whispered that the man in the corner was making me uncomfortable, he said he'd speak to the manager. But when the manager came over 5 minutes later, the man's table was empty, just a half-eaten steak and a glass of red wine left behind. The manager apologized and offered us free dessert, saying some guests overindulged and forgot their manners. Tom tried to lighten the mood by joking about it, but I couldn't stop thinking about how the man knew exactly which restaurant we'd chosen out of 5 options. After dinner, Tom suggested we check out the casino on the ground floor, but I just wanted to go back to the room. My nerves were shot, and the wine wasn't helping. The walk back to room 312 felt longer than before, and I kept hearing things. A door clicking shut somewhere behind us, the elevator arriving even though we hadn't called it, footsteps that seemed to stop whenever we stopped. Tom was getting frustrated with my jumpiness, saying I was ruining our vacation over some lonely weirdo who probably did this to women all the time. When we finally reached our door, I made Tom check inside the room first while I waited in the hallway. He thought I was being ridiculous, but he did it anyway, even checking the bathroom and the closet. We locked up tight, deadbolt, chain, and Tom even wedged a chair under the door handle as a joke to make me feel better. We watched some movie on TV, and by 11 o'clock I was starting to feel silly about the whole thing. Tom was already snoring beside me when I finally drifted off, the sound of the ocean waves through our balcony door almost drowning out my lingering anxiety. I woke up at 2:47 a.m. to the sound of metal scraping against metal. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard it again, the distinctive sound of a key card being inserted into our door's lock. The little light on the lock flashed red, and there was a muffled curse from the other side. Tom was still dead asleep, so I shook him hard while watching the door handle, which was now jiggling violently. Someone was trying different key cards, sliding them in and out, and each time the light flashed red, the person would grunt and try again. The chair Tom had wedged against the door started to shift slightly with each attempt to push the door open. I whispered Tom's name urgently, and he finally woke up, confused until he heard the next scrape of a card in the lock. We both sat there in the dark, completely still, watching the door handle turn back and forth. Then came the knocking. Not normal knocking, but this slow, deliberate rhythm. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause. It went on for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or 2. Then the voice started, low and slurred, like he'd been drinking heavily since dinner. "I know you're awake in there, saw your shadow move under the door." His mouth was so close to the door gap that we could hear his breathing, wet and labored. "Just wanted to talk. You were so friendly at the pool. Why aren't you friendly now?" Tom grabbed his phone to call security, but I grabbed his wrist. I was terrified that any sound we made would escalate things. The man outside continued his monologue, voice getting progressively more agitated. "Room 312, easy to remember, 3 + 1 + 2 = 6, my lucky number." He laughed at this, a wheezy sound that turned into a cough. "That husband of yours, he's sleeping, isn't he? Heavy sleeper." I watched him at dinner, saw him drink those 3 glasses of wine. Bet he won't wake up for anything. The door handle rattled again, more violently this time, and we heard him slam his shoulder against the door. The chain held, but the sound was so loud I was sure other guests would hear. But no one came out to check, no voices in the hallway, nothing. Tom finally called security while I called the front desk simultaneously. The woman who answered sounded half asleep and asked me to repeat myself twice before she understood. Meanwhile, the man outside had started sliding something under our door. Business cards, dozens of them, all blank except for a handwritten phone number. He kept talking while he did it, describing my bathing suit, the color of my nail polish, the exact spot where I'd applied sunscreen at the pool. "You missed a spot on your left shoulder," he said. "It's probably red now." I could help with that. Tom was on the phone with security, giving our room number, but they said they were on the opposite side of the resort dealing with another issue, and it would take at least 10 minutes to get someone to us. 10 minutes felt like a lifetime. The man outside had gone quiet for a moment, and then we heard the sound of liquid hitting our door, followed by the unmistakable smell of urine. He was urinating on our door while humming some tune I didn't recognize. Tom lost it then, shouting that he was calling the police, that he had a weapon, anything to make the guy leave. But the man just laughed and said, "No cell service out here for regular phones. Only the resort phones work. And the police? 45 minutes away if they hurry." The next few minutes were the longest of my life. We pushed the dresser in front of the door, then the desk, creating a barricade while the man outside alternated between pounding on the door and periods of eerie silence where we could only hear his breathing. During one of those quiet moments, we heard him talking to someone else. Another male voice, younger sounding, asking what he was doing. The man said I was his wife, and I'd locked him out after an argument. The other voice seemed skeptical but walked away after the man insisted everything was fine. That's when real panic set in because I realized he was coherent enough to lie convincingly to strangers. He wasn't just some drunk guest. He was calculating. Tom grabbed the lamp from the nightstand, ready to use it as a weapon if the man somehow got through. I was in the bathroom filling the ice bucket with scalding hot water from the tap, thinking I could throw it if needed. We heard him trying the balcony next. Our room was on the 3rd floor, but there was a narrow ledge that connected the balconies, and he was out there trying to shimmy across from the adjacent room. Tom rushed to lock the sliding door just as we saw his silhouette appear at the edge of our balcony. Security finally arrived at 3:19 a.m. I know the exact time because I'd been staring at the clock, counting every second. We heard shouting in the hallway, the man's voice getting higher and more frantic, claiming we'd invited him and then changed our minds. There was a scuffle, the sound of someone being slammed against the wall, and then multiple voices as more security arrived. The head of security knocked on our door, identifying himself and sliding his ID under so we could verify it was really him. When we finally opened the door, the hallway reeked of urine, and there were those business cards scattered everywhere. They took our statements. Tom showed them photos he'd taken of the man through the peephole, and they assured us he was being held until the police arrived. Turns out, he wasn't even a guest at the resort. He'd been sneaking in for weeks, using a stolen staff keycard to access different areas. They found him living in a maintenance room in the basement, with dozens of photos on his phone of female guests, including several of me from that day. The resort moved us to a different room, comped our entire stay, and begged us not to post about it online. We left the next morning anyway, driving straight to the airport even though our flight wasn't for 3 more days. I still have nightmares about those pale gray eyes and that wet, raspy breathing against our door. The heat in Chicago that July afternoon was the kind that made the pavement shimmer like water. I was there with my college roommate Vanessa, celebrating our graduation with a week-long trip we'd been planning since freshman year. We'd just finished lunch at this tiny Vietnamese place in Chinatown when we decided to walk toward the Art Institute. Vanessa had her camera out, taking photos of everything, the red pagoda-style buildings, the hanging lanterns, even the graffiti on the brick walls. We were 22, invincible, and completely unaware that within the next hour, we'd be fighting to get out of a nightmare we'd walked ourselves into. I still remember the taste of that last iced coffee I was sipping, sweet and cold, before everything went wrong. The man approached us near the corner of Cermak and Wentworth, where the tourist shops start thinning out and the neighborhood gets quieter. He looked like any other local, maybe 45, wearing a Cubs jersey and khaki shorts with this genuine, warm smile that reminded me of my Uncle Gary. He had a slight limp and carried a worn leather messenger bag across his shoulder. "Excuse me, ladies," he said, pulling out his phone to show us he was part of some community group. "I run free walking tours for visitors, trying to show people the real Chicago, not just the tourist traps. I've got about 40 minutes before my next paid group, and I hate walking alone. Would you like to see some hidden architectural gems just 3 blocks from here?" His phone screen showed what looked like a legitimate Facebook page with hundreds of reviews and photos of smiling tourists. Vanessa and I exchanged glances, and she shrugged. We were already wandering aimlessly anyway. He introduced himself as Doug and started walking, pointing out details about the buildings as we went. The year they were built, which families owned them, little historical facts that seemed too specific to be made up. He knew which restaurant used to be a speakeasy, which alley was used in a movie from the 80s. He even stopped to pet a cat that was lounging on a stoop, calling it by name. "Hey there, Patches." And the cat actually came to him. Every detail made him seem more legitimate, more like just a friendly local who loved his city. Vanessa was recording parts of his commentary on her phone, and I was taking mental notes for the travel blog I'd promised myself I'd start. We turned down a narrower street where the buildings were older, more industrial, with those old fire escapes zigzagging down the facades. Doug pointed to a building ahead with boarded-up windows on the ground floor, but ornate stonework around what used to be the entrance. "This one's special," Doug said, fishing out a key from his messenger bag. "Built in 1892 as a printing press, then converted to apartments in the 50s. The owner lets me bring small groups through because we're trying to get it designated as a historical landmark. The interior still has the original tin ceilings and marble stairs." He unlocked a side door that looked recently installed. Metal, modern, completely out of place with the old brick. The hallway inside was dim but not dark. Sunlight filtered through dirty windows at the far end. It smelled like dust and old wood, maybe a hint of pigeon droppings, but nothing that screamed danger. Vanessa went in first, her camera already up, capturing the peeling paint and exposed brick. I followed, and Doug came in behind us, still talking about the building's history, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space. The door clicked shut behind him, and that's when I noticed it. The sound was different from a normal door closing, heavier somehow, more final. Doug led us deeper into the building, up a set of stairs that creaked under our weight. The marble he'd mentioned was there, but covered in decades of grime. On the second floor, he pushed open a door to what he called the showcase room. And I'll admit, it was impressive at first. High ceilings with intricate tin patterns, tall windows with antique glass that warped the view outside, built-in wooden shelving that must have held thousands of books once. Vanessa was in photographer heaven, crouching to get angles, adjusting her lens. Doug stood by the doorway, scrolling through his phone, and I noticed he'd positioned himself between us and the exit. "Take your time," he said, that warm smile still there. "I'll just let my next group know I'm running a few minutes late." He typed something quickly, and I heard a faint buzzing from somewhere else in the building, like another phone vibrating in response. The change happened fast. Doug's whole demeanor shifted like someone had flipped a switch. The friendly tour guide expression melted away, replaced by something calculating and cold. He put his phone in his pocket and pulled out something else, a thick zip tie. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice completely different now, flat and matter-of-fact. "Your friend is going to put her expensive camera in my bag. You're going to add your phones, wallets, and jewelry. Then we're going to have a conversation about pins and passwords." Vanessa spun around, her face going pale when she saw what he was holding. I tried to move toward the door, but Doug stepped fully into the frame, blocking it. He was bigger than I'd realized, the limp from earlier completely gone. "The windows are painted shut, ladies. The fire escape was removed years ago, and my partner downstairs has already locked the main entrance. You can cooperate, or we can do this differently. But either way, you're not leaving until we get what we need." My mind went into overdrive, calculating options while trying to keep my face neutral. Vanessa's hands were trembling as she clutched her camera, a Canon her parents had given her for graduation, worth at least $3,000. I remembered something from a self-defense class I'd taken junior year. Never let them take you to a second location, and we were already in one. But the instructor had also said sometimes compliance is survival, especially when outnumbered. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'll cooperate, just nobody needs to get hurt, right?" Doug nodded. but his eyes stayed hard, watching us like we were unpredictable animals. I slowly reached for my crossbody bag, making a show of opening it. Inside, along with my wallet, was a small canister of pepper spray attached to my keys. It was one of those legal ones, not very strong, but maybe enough if I could get close. The problem was Doug maintained his distance, clearly experienced at this. That's when we heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate, each one echoing through the empty building. Doug's partner appeared in the doorway, and my heart sank even further. She was maybe 30, wearing yoga clothes like she'd just come from a gym, blonde hair in a messy bun, the kind of person you'd ask for directions without thinking twice. She was carrying a backpack and had latex gloves on. "These two?" she asked Doug like we were items on a shopping list. "Yeah, the camera alone will cover this month's rent," he replied. The woman approached Vanessa first, probably because she looked more scared. "Camera first, honey. Nice and slow." As Vanessa lifted the camera strap over her head, I saw something that gave me the tiniest spark of hope. Her phone was still recording video in her jacket pocket, the lens barely visible. She'd never stopped recording when Doug had revealed himself. If we could somehow get out of here, we'd have evidence. But first, we had to survive. The woman was going through Vanessa's bag when we heard it. Sirens getting closer. Not just one or two, but multiple emergency vehicles. Doug and his partner exchanged a quick glance, and for the first time I saw uncertainty in their eyes. The woman walked quickly to one of the tall windows, peering through the warped glass. "Fire trucks," she said, "3 of them. They're stopping at the warehouse 2 blocks over." Doug relaxed slightly, but I didn't. This was our chance. I started coughing, violent, hacking coughs that bent me over double. "I can't breathe," I gasped between coughs. "Asthma inhaler in my bag." It was a complete lie, but I sold it hard, wheezing, clutching at my throat. Vanessa caught on immediately. "Oh my God, she's having an attack. This happened in finals week. She needs her inhaler now or she could die." The panic in her voice was real, even if the reason wasn't. I dropped to my knees, making horrible wheezing sounds I remembered from when my roommate freshman year had an actual asthma attack. The woman looked annoyed, but also worried. A dead tourist would bring way too much heat. "Get her inhaler," she snapped at Doug. He grabbed my bag roughly, dumping its contents on the dusty floor. While he was distracted searching through my things, I watched the woman's position. She'd moved closer to help look, leaving the doorway partially clear. My pepper spray had rolled under some old newspapers when Doug emptied my bag. I kept up the wheezing, adding some convincing gasps, watching them both crouch down, focused on finding an inhaler that didn't exist. Then I made my move. I grabbed the pepper spray, flicked the safety off with my thumb, and sprayed it directly up into Doug's face from maybe 2 feet away. He screamed, hands flying to his eyes, stumbling backward. The woman lunged for me, but Vanessa swung her camera bag hard, catching her in the side of the head. The $1,000 lens inside made a satisfying crack against her skull. We didn't wait to see if they'd recover. We just ran. We flew down those marble stairs, taking 3 at a time, our sneakers slapping against the stone, the sounds of Doug's cursing and the woman's shouting echoing behind us. The main door was locked as they'd said, but there was a window next to it, one of those old single-pane ones. Vanessa didn't hesitate. She picked up a broken piece of concrete from the floor and smashed it straight through. Glass exploded outward, and we could hear Doug stumbling down the stairs behind us, still half blind but coming fast. I knocked out the remaining shards with my elbow, cutting my arm in the process but not caring, and we squeezed through. We hit the street running and didn't stop. A man walking his dog stared as we sprinted past, Vanessa still clutching her camera bag with its broken lens, my arm bleeding through my shirt. We ran for 4 blocks before we saw a police car parked outside a Walgreens. I've never been so happy to see cops in my life. The rest happened in a blur. The officers called for backup immediately when Vanessa showed them the video on her phone, Doug's face was clear as day, talking about his partner downstairs and mentioning the exits being blocked. They found the building within an hour, but Doug and the woman were gone. However, the cops found something else. Personal items from at least a dozen other victims hidden in a locked room in the basement. Driver's licenses, credit cards, even a few passports. Turns out they'd been running this scam for months, targeting tourists in different neighborhoods, always moving around. The detective told us we were lucky. Most victims had been too scared or embarrassed to fight back, and several had been held for hours while the pair maxed out their credit cards and bank accounts. They caught Doug 3 weeks later trying the same thing in Milwaukee. The woman was never found. I still have a scar on my arm from that window. This thin white line that reminds me every day how close we came to being just another statistic. Vanessa and I finished our Chicago trip, but we stuck to the main tourist areas after that, always in groups, never trusting anyone who approached us on the street. And that travel blog I was going to start? The first post was about how to spot tourist scams. It went viral. I went to the desert festival that year mostly for the escape. Back then, I was juggling 2 part-time jobs and living with my cousin in a cramped apartment near the city. So a weekend surrounded by music, endless sky, and friends felt like exactly what I needed. We'd driven out in 2 cars, packed with tents, coolers, and more sunscreen than food. The place was massive, a sprawl of makeshift campsites dotted with flags, fairy lights, and the constant low hum of bass rolling over the sand. During the day, the heat wrapped around you like a heavy blanket. But once the sun dipped, the air turned sharp and cool, and the desert felt like a different world. On the second night, we'd all gone to one of the main stages to see a band my friend Danielle had been raving about for months. The crowd was thick, the kind of press where strangers brush past you every few seconds, and neon lights blurred in my vision with each turn of my head. Somewhere between getting pulled into a dance circle and queuing for overpriced lemonade, I lost track of my group. Normally I wouldn't have cared. I've got a decent sense of direction. But at that festival, after dark, everything looked the same. I wandered for a while, thinking I'd spot our flag or the glow-in-the-dark tape Danielle had wrapped around our tent poles. It was when I was cutting between 2 rows of parked RVs that I noticed a guy leaning against the hood of a dusty silver SUV. He wasn't dressed like most people there. No glitter, no tie-dye, just a dark windbreaker and jeans. His hands tucked into the pockets like he had nowhere particular to be. When our eyes met, he gave a small nod, like he recognized me. And that's when it clicked. I'd seen him earlier in the day hanging a few feet from our campsite. I didn't remember talking to him, but I remembered the way he seemed to just linger, watching people set up. He asked if I was headed back to camp and said he could give me a ride. Long walk in the dark, he added, gesturing toward the distant scatter of lights where the campsites were. My phone battery was nearly dead, and the idea of weaving through the dark paths alone made me hesitate. His SUV looked familiar enough that I convinced myself he was probably a friend of someone in our group. I climbed into the passenger seat, telling myself I'd be back at the tent in 5 minutes. Halfway down the main road, the SUV's headlights caught a swirl of dust ahead, and instead of continuing toward the glow of the camps, he slowed and flicked on his turn signal. I thought maybe he was taking a shortcut, but the tires crunched onto a narrow dirt track that veered away from the festival. Out here, the only light came from the moon, and the beams from the headlights barely reached beyond the curve of the road. I asked if this was the right way, and he said, "Yeah, trust me, it's quicker." His voice was calm, almost too casual, like we weren't suddenly heading into pitch-black desert. The deeper we went, the more I realized how far we were getting from any sign of the festival. The music had faded into nothing, replaced by the steady hum of the engine and the occasional ping of gravel against the undercarriage. Sagebrush blurred past, and every so often the headlights would catch a cluster of rocks that looked like figures until we got close. My phone had dipped into the dreaded no-service zone, and the battery icon was down to a single red sliver. I kept glancing at it, willing a bar of reception to pop up, while he kept his eyes locked on the road. After a few minutes, we passed a rusted-out water tank and what looked like the skeletal frame of an old shed. He slowed again, scanning the dark beyond the windshield like he was looking for something specific. That's when I started noticing little things. The way his knuckles tightened slightly on the steering wheel, the faint scent of cigarette smoke baked into the upholstery, the faint click of his tongue against his teeth every so often. I didn't know what lay ahead on that dirt road, but the idea of getting there with him suddenly felt like the worst plan I'd ever agreed to. I tried to play it off, asking casually how he knew the festival, who he came with, but his answers were short and vague. "Met some people," he said, then nothing more. No names, no details. The wind rattled the passenger side mirror, and I found myself focusing on that sound, counting each rattle as if it might anchor me. Somewhere up ahead, a faint orange glow flickered between the ridges, not like the steady light of the camps, but more like a fire. He steered toward it without hesitation. The orange glow grew brighter as we approached, until the shape of a small open clearing came into view. In the middle sat a metal drum, flames licking out of the top, casting jittery shadows across the sand. A folding chair lay tipped on its side near it, and beyond that, I could barely make out the outline of some kind of shack or trailer, dark except for a sliver of light seeping through one window. He pulled up alongside the fire, put the SUV in park, and cut the engine. The sudden silence felt heavier than the desert air itself. He turned toward me then, and for the first time since I'd gotten in, he smiled. Not a big, welcoming grin, but something small and unreadable, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Gotta grab something real quick," he said, reaching into his pocket. Without waiting for a reply, he got out, his boots crunching over the sand as he headed toward the trailer. Fire popped, sending a spray of sparks into the night, and I sat there gripping the seatbelt, trying to decide if getting out would be safer than staying put. I leaned over, scanning the dash for anything: keys, a phone charger, a map. But the SUV was stripped down to the basics. No personal clutter, no hint of who he was. That's when I noticed the faint hum of another engine somewhere behind us, out on the main road. It was distant but steady, and the thought hit me like a lifeline. If I could get out and flag whoever it was, maybe I could get back without having to see what he was grabbing. Sliding out of the passenger seat, I kept low and moved around to the far side of the SUV, using it as cover. My sneakers sank into the loose sand with every step, making it impossible to move quietly. But the crackle of the fire and the faint wind covered most of it. The hum of the other engine grew closer, and I stepped out from behind the SUV, waving my arms toward the road. The headlights of a pickup truck came into view on the main road, its low beams sweeping across the scrub. I stepped further into the open, waving both arms over my head. The SUV's driver must have heard me, because I caught a quick flash of movement near the trailer, his silhouette turning sharply toward me before breaking into a stride. My pulse hammered in my ears, but the truck was already slowing, its tires crunching over the gravel shoulder. A man in his 50s leaned out the driver's window, squinting at me. "You lost?" he called over the rumble of the engine. I didn't bother with details, just said I needed to get back to the festival and that my friends were looking for me. He gestured to the passenger side, and I climbed in without a glance back at the SUV. The moment the door shut, he eased the truck onto the road, heading in the opposite direction of the dirt track. In the side mirror, I saw the man from the SUV standing in the clearing, his face just beyond the reach of the firelight. We rode in silence for a while, the hum of the truck steady, the lights of the festival slowly reappearing on the horizon. The driver eventually said he'd been a vendor at the event and was heading back after packing up. He didn't ask questions, just made sure I was dropped off at a security tent near the entrance. From there, I spotted Danielle running toward me, her relief obvious even in the chaos of the crowd. I didn't tell her everything right then, just that I'd gotten turned around and found my way back. Even now, I still think about what would have happened if that truck hadn't come along when it did. The dirt road, the fire in the middle of nowhere, the way he didn't hesitate to take that turn. It's all burned into my memory. I don't know what he was planning or why he seemed to know exactly where he was going out there, but I do know I'll never again get into a stranger's car, no matter how familiar their face looks. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The gas gauge had been blinking at me for the last 10 miles, that angry orange light practically screaming, while I white-knuckled the steering wheel and prayed I'd make it to the next exit. 21 years old, junior year at State, and there I was pushing my luck on a deserted stretch of highway because I'd been too stubborn to stop earlier when there were actually decent places around. My roommate Jess had warned me about leaving her family's cabin so late on a Sunday night, but I'd waved her off, figured I knew these roads well enough after 3 years of college. The psychology papers in my backseat could wait until morning, I'd told myself. Better to just get back to campus and deal with everything fresh. October 2018 was shaping up to be one of those semesters where everything piled up at once, and this weekend at the cabin had been my first real break in weeks. The station materialized through the darkness like something out of those true crime podcasts I'd been binging lately. Isolated, barely lit, the kind of place where the bathroom key is attached to a piece of wood the size of a baseball bat. 2 ancient pumps sat under a metal canopy that had seen better decades, rust eating through the corners, one fluorescent tube completely dead, while the other flickered every few seconds like Morse code. The convenience store slouched behind dirty windows plastered with faded lottery ads and beer promotions from brands I didn't even recognize. A dark pickup truck sat parked at an odd angle near the dumpster, not at a pump, just there like it had been abandoned. I coasted in on fumes, practically holding my breath, and pulled up to the pump closest to the exit because even then, something in my gut was already doing little flips. I swiped my card and started pumping, the numbers on the display crawling upward at what felt like the slowest rate possible. That's when I noticed them, 2 guys standing near the convenience store entrance, not together exactly, but not separate either. The first one was leaning against the ice machine, tall and lanky with a Carhartt jacket that had seen too many winters, smoking a cigarette and staring straight at me without even pretending to look away. The second guy was shorter, stockier, wearing a baseball cap pulled low, and he was pretending to mess with his phone near the trash cans, but I could see him glancing up every few seconds. Neither of them had vehicles at the pumps. Neither of them was buying anything. They were just there, at nearly midnight, hanging around a gas station in the middle of nowhere like they had nothing better to do. The pump clicked past 5 gallons, and I started doing that mental math you do when every instinct is telling you to leave. How much gas do I actually need to get back, versus how long do I have to stand here exposed? The tall one flicked his cigarette onto the ground and pushed off from the ice machine, starting to walk in my direction, but taking this wide, casual arc like he was heading to the pickup truck. Except he wasn't. He was moving to position himself between my car and the exit, still keeping that lazy pace like we were all just having a normal night. The shorter one pocketed his phone and started walking too, coming from the opposite side, heading toward the pump behind mine. My throat went dry as I watched them in the reflection of my car window, both moving with this weird coordination that couldn't be coincidental. 8 gallons. 9. The tall one was now standing by the air pump, maybe 15 feet from my car's front bumper, just standing there with his hands in his pockets, rocking back and forth on his heels like he had all the time in the world. The shorter one had made it to the pump behind me and was now pretending to read the instructions on the credit card reader, even though there was no car there. No reason for him to be studying it so intently. I could hear him breathing through his mouth, This wet, raspy sound that made my skin prickle. The night air felt heavy, thick with the smell of gasoline and old oil stains, and I realized I'd been holding the pump handle so tight my knuckles were white. 10 gallons. I needed to make a decision. The convenience store clerk was visible through the window, some kid who looked barely 18, absorbed in his phone behind the counter, completely oblivious to what was happening outside. "Hey there," the tall one called out, his voice cutting through the silence like a dull knife. "You heading north or south?" He'd taken a few steps closer while I'd been watching the shorter one, and now he was maybe 10 feet away, close enough that I could smell the stale smoke on his clothes. I didn't answer, just kept my eyes on the pump display while my mind raced through options. The shorter one had moved again too, circling around to lean against the concrete pillar between the pumps, effectively blocking my driver's side. "Not very friendly, are you?" the tall one continued, and there was something underneath his casual tone that made every alarm in my head go off at once. He took another step forward, and I saw his hand move inside his jacket pocket, not pulling anything out, just adjusting something, letting me know it was there. The pump finally clicked off at 12 gallons, the automatic shutoff engaging with a loud thunk that made me jump. My car only held 14 gallons total, but I'd take whatever I could get. I yanked the nozzle out, not even caring that a few drops splattered on my shoes, and fumbled to get the gas cap back on. The tall one laughed, this low chuckle that sounded like gravel in a blender. "Where's the fire, sweetheart?" He was close enough now that he could probably grab me if he lunged, and the shorter one had started moving again, coming around the back of my car. They were trying to box me in against the pump. I finally looked up at the tall one, met his eyes, pale blue, bloodshot, with pupils that were way too dilated for the bright lights, and said the first thing that came to mind. "My boyfriend's waiting for me. He knows exactly where I am." It was a lie, obviously. Nobody knew where I was, but his smile faltered for just a second. That's when I made my move. Instead of going for my driver's door like they expected, I yanked open the back door on the passenger side and dove through, scrambling over the seats while they both started moving fast. The shorter one actually grabbed the back door before I could pull it shut, his thick fingers wrapping around the frame, and I kicked at his hand hard with my heel. He cursed and jerked back just long enough for me to slam it shut and hit the locks. The tall one was already at my driver's window, pounding on it with his fist, his face twisted into something ugly. "Open up! We just want to talk." But I was already starting the engine, throwing it in drive before I even had my seatbelt on. The shorter one tried to get in front of the car, arms spread wide like he could stop me, but I laid on the horn and gunned it straight at him. He dove sideways at the last second, rolling across the dirty concrete as I tore out of there, tires squealing against the pavement. I didn't look back, just floored it onto the highway, my speedometer climbing past 80, 90, pushing my old Corolla harder than I'd ever driven it. My whole body was shaking so bad I could barely keep the wheel steady, and I kept checking the rearview mirror, terrified I'd see headlights gaining on me. For 5 minutes, 10 minutes, nothing, just empty road behind me. Then, just as I started to breathe again, there they were. High beams in the distance, coming up fast. Way too fast. The pickup truck had to be. They must have jumped in right after I peeled out. I pushed the accelerator all the way down, hit 95, 100, the whole car vibrating like it might fly apart. The headlights kept coming. There was an exit coming up in 2 miles. One of those nothing exits that just led to farm roads, but I knew there was a 24-hour truck stop another 3 miles past that. More people, witnesses, safety. The headlights were getting closer, maybe half a mile back now. I almost missed the exit ramp, taking it at 70, my car sliding sideways before I got control again. The pickup truck shot past on the highway, brakes lighting up red as they realized I'd turned off. But I knew they'd circle back, take the next exit and try to cut me off. The road was pitch black, no streetlights, just my headlights cutting through darkness and the yellow lines disappearing under my hood. The truck stop's giant sign appeared like a beacon, That beautiful bright blue and red diesel pumps and a dozen semis parked in neat rows. I screeched into the lot and parked right in front of the doors, directly under the security cameras, practically falling out of my car. My legs felt like jelly. Inside, there were truckers drinking coffee, a family with kids eating microwaved burritos, normal people living normal lives. I ran to the counter, probably looking absolutely insane, and told the clerk to call the police, that 2 men had just tried to attack me at the previous gas station. The cops showed up within 15 minutes. 2 officers who took my statement while I sat in a booth nursing a cup of coffee I couldn't even taste. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, even wrapped around the warm mug. I gave them every detail I could remember. The Carhartt jacket, the baseball cap, the dark pickup truck. Even drew them a rough sketch of the gas station layout showing where each man had positioned himself. They radioed it in and sent a unit to check the station. 40 minutes later, they got a call back. The gas station clerk, that 18-year-old kid, said 2 men matching my description had come into the store right after I'd left, asking him which direction I'd gone. When he said he didn't know, they'd gotten aggressive, knocked over a display rack, and taken off. But here's what really got me. The security footage showed they'd been there for 2 hours before I arrived, just waiting. The clerk said they'd bought nothing, just hung around outside, occasionally checking the highway like they were expecting someone. The police never caught them. They found the pickup truck 3 days later, abandoned in a rest stop 50 miles away, reported stolen from a construction site the week before. The plates were fake, no fingerprints they could use. The detective assigned to my case called me a month later to say they'd linked similar incidents at that same gas station, going back 8 months. Always late at night, always targeting women traveling alone, always 2 men working together. 3 other women had reported similar encounters, but I was the only one who'd gotten away before anything worse happened. They think the men were spotting targets from the highway, following them until they stopped for gas, then radioing ahead to their partner. The station finally installed better lighting and hired security after my incident. I never drove that route alone again, started taking the longer way around even though it added an hour to the trip. Sometimes I still dream about those pale blue eyes and wonder what would have happened if I'd gone for my driver's door instead of diving through the back. The detective said my quick thinking probably saved my life. I just know that every time I stop for gas now, even in broad daylight, I check every corner of the lot before I even turn off my engine. I'd been driving for medical equipment sales for about 2 months when my car died on Highway 93. 32 years old, recently divorced, and desperate to make this new job work. That was me, pushing a 2014 Ford Fusion through Nevada desert roads longer than I should have. The position required covering facilities across 3 states, which meant 12-hour drives had become routine. That particular Tuesday, I'd wrapped up a demonstration at a clinic outside Reno around 4 in the afternoon. My plan was simple: reach the motel in Kingman, Arizona by 9, sleep, then hit the Phoenix office by noon Wednesday. The stretch between Nevada and Arizona is mostly nothing. Desert, mountains, and occasional Joshua trees standing like twisted sentinels against the landscape. I usually filled the silence with true crime podcasts, letting strangers' voices keep me company through the emptiness. Around 7:30, just as the desert was swallowing the last bit of daylight, my temperature gauge started creeping toward the red zone. I'd noticed some coolant spots under the car over the past few weeks, but kept telling myself I'd deal with it on the weekend. The engine made a grinding sound first, then came the steam, white wisps curling from under the hood like smoke signals. I pulled onto the shoulder and killed the engine immediately. The smell hit me as soon as I stepped out. That sickly sweet scent of burning coolant mixed with hot metal. My phone showed 1 flickering bar of signal. Google Maps said I was 68 miles from Copper Springs, the nearest town. The tow service website loaded just long enough to show they closed at 6. I tried calling anyway, but the connection died before the first ring. For 20 minutes I stood there watching the occasional vehicle blast past, their headlights sweeping over me for a second, before vanishing into the darkness ahead. The pickup truck appeared around 8 o'clock, emerging from the darkness like it had materialized from the desert itself. It was a beat-up Chevy Silverado, probably early 2000s, painted primer gray with rust eating through the wheel wells. The driver pulled up about 30 feet behind my car and left his engine running, headlights on high beam. I couldn't see him clearly through the glare, just a silhouette moving behind the windshield. He sat there for maybe 30 seconds before opening his door. The man who stepped out was probably mid-40s, wearing faded jeans and a flannel shirt, despite the heat still radiating from the asphalt. He had one of those builds that came from actual labor, not a gym. Thick arms, barrel chest, shoulders that stretched his shirt tight. His hair was cut military short, and when he smiled, I noticed he was missing a bottom tooth on the left side. "Engine trouble?" he called out, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl that didn't quite fit with the Nevada plates on his truck. I explained about the overheating, how I was waiting for it to cool down enough to maybe limp to the next exit. He walked over to my car, not asking permission, and peered under the hood with a small flashlight he'd pulled from his back pocket. "Radiator hose is split," he said after about 10 seconds of looking. "See that crack there? You're not driving anywhere on that tonight." He was right. Even in the dim light, I could see coolant had sprayed all over the engine block. He straightened up and wiped his hands on his jeans, leaving dark streaks. "I can give you a ride to Copper Springs if you want. Got a buddy who runs a shop there. Might be able to tow you in the morning." Something about the way he said it felt rehearsed, like he'd given this exact speech before. But standing there in the dark, temperature dropping fast the way it does in the desert, with no cell signal and no other options presenting themselves, I heard myself saying yes. He helped me grab my laptop bag and overnight duffel from my car, insisting on carrying them himself to his truck. The inside of the Silverado smelled like motor oil and something else, earthy and organic, like wet soil or maybe fertilizer. Fast food wrappers littered the floor, and a pine tree air freshener hung from the mirror, long past doing any good. He tossed my bags in the back before I could say anything, where they landed next to some kind of tarp-covered pile. "Name's Carl," he said, starting the engine. "You?" I told him I was Nathan, and he nodded slowly, repeating it under his breath like he was memorizing it. We pulled onto the highway, and I noticed he wasn't accelerating much, keeping us at about 45 in a 65 zone. When I mentioned it, he said something about the transmission acting up, but his speedometer seemed to be working fine from where I sat. 10 minutes into the drive, Carl started asking questions. Where was I heading? Phoenix. What did I do? Medical equipment sales. Was anyone expecting me tonight? That last one made me hesitate before answering. I lied and said yes. My girlfriend was waiting for me at the motel. He glanced at me sideways and made this sound, like a quiet laugh or maybe just clearing his throat. "That's good," he said. "Always good to have someone waiting." We passed a green exit sign for Highway 318, which I knew led to Copper Springs. Carl didn't slow down. When I pointed this out, he kept his eyes on the road and said his buddy's shop was actually in the next town over. Millfield, just another 20 miles. "Better shop, better prices," he added. The thing was, I'd driven this route a dozen times. There was no town called Millfield on this highway. My chest started feeling tight, and I found myself calculating how badly I'd get hurt if I jumped from a truck going 45 miles per hour. Carl must have sensed something because he turned to me with that gap-toothed smile again. "You seem tense, Nathan. Long day." His right hand moved from the steering wheel to rest on something between our seats. In the darkness of the cab, I couldn't tell what it was at first. But then we passed under a streetlight from an overpass, and I saw the handle of a hammer tucked between his seat and the center console. Not a small one either. One of those framing hammers with the long handle and heavy head. "Just tired," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded and moved his hand back to the wheel. but I noticed he'd shifted the hammer so it was angled more toward him, easier to grab. We drove in silence for another few minutes before he spoke again. "You know, I used to do sales too. Different kind though. Agricultural supplies, lot of driving, lot of empty roads. You meet all kinds of interesting people out here in the nothing." The way he emphasized interesting made my skin prickle. The truck started slowing down, and I saw Carl's eyes flicking to his mirrors more frequently. There were no other vehicles visible in either direction, just empty highway stretching into darkness. He turned off onto what looked like a service road, barely visible unless you knew it was there. "Shortcut," he said before I could ask. The road was unpaved, gravel crunching under the tires. My phone was in my pocket, and I carefully pulled it out while pretending to adjust my seatbelt. Still no signal, but I started recording video anyway, holding it low against my thigh. The headlights illuminated abandoned mining equipment on both sides of the road, rusted conveyor belts, old cart tracks, machinery I couldn't identify. Carl was humming something now, some tune I didn't recognize, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel in rhythm. After about 3 miles, he pulled up to what looked like an old processing building, corrugated metal siding streaked with rust, windows either broken or boarded up. "Need to pick something up real quick," he said, putting the truck in park but leaving it running. "Won't take but a minute." The moment Carl stepped out of the truck, I knew I had seconds to make a decision. He walked toward the building but kept glancing back at the truck, like he was expecting me to run. Through the windshield, I watched him pull out a key and unlock a padlock on a side door. The second he disappeared inside, I slid over to the driver's seat. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely grip the gear shift. I threw it in reverse and floored it, gravel spraying everywhere. In the side mirror, I saw Carl burst out of the building, running after the truck and shouting something I couldn't hear over the engine. He had something in his hand, not the hammer, something longer, like a pipe or maybe a shotgun. I spun the wheel hard, trying to turn around in the narrow space, and that's when I saw what was under the tarp in the truck bed. The corner had come loose, and I could see what looked like hair, long, dark hair, and part of a jacket. A women's jacket, purple or maybe dark blue. I didn't look closer, I couldn't. I just drove, pushing that old Silverado harder than Carl had the entire trip, bouncing over potholes and nearly losing control twice. It took me 15 minutes to find the main highway again, and another hour before I reached a gas station with working lights and people. I pulled in so fast I almost hit the pump, stumbling out of the truck on legs that felt like water. The night clerk, a kid maybe 19 years old with gauged ears and a name tag that said Jerome, took one look at me and asked if I needed him to call 911. I said yes, and while we waited for the police, I sat in that bright fluorescent light drinking bad coffee with shaking hands. Carl's truck still running outside because I'd been too scared to turn it off. The police found my car right where I'd left it, but Carl was gone. They found the building too, and confirmed what I'd glimpsed under that tarp. Her name was Melissa Crawford, a real estate agent from Utah who'd been missing for 3 days. The other thing they found in that building, the thing Carl had gone in to get, was a roll of heavy-duty trash bags and a bone saw still in its hardware store packaging. The detective who interviewed me, a woman named Hawkins with 20 years on the force, told me Carl wasn't even his real name. They'd been looking for him in connection with 2 other disappearances along that stretch of highway, both people whose cars had broken down in the last 18 months. His actual name was Dennis Kruger, and he'd been using different trucks, different names but always the same method, playing the helpful stranger on empty roads. The radiator hose on my Ford wasn't just cracked from wear. When they examined it, they found a clean cut along the bottom, small enough to cause a slow leak that would get worse with heat and pressure. Dennis had been at that clinic in Reno. Security footage showed him in the parking lot for 6 minutes while I was inside doing my presentation. 6 minutes to crawl under my car and set everything in motion. He knew exactly how far I'd get before breaking down, had probably been following at a distance, waiting for the steam to start rising. They never caught him. His truck, actually registered to someone who'd been dead for 2 years, was found burned out in the desert a week later. The FBI got involved after they connected him to similar cases in New Mexico and Utah. I had to get a new job, couldn't handle the driving anymore. Now I work IT support for a bank in Denver, strictly office work, no travel required. Sometimes I still check the news for highway disappearances in the Southwest, looking for his pattern. The detective calls me every few months to tell me they're still looking, that guys like him always mess up eventually. But we both know he's probably out there somewhere with a different truck, a different name, driving slow on dark highways, looking for the next person with car trouble. I keep that video I recorded on my phone, those 3 minutes of darkness and gravel roads and Carl humming that tune. Not sure why. Maybe to remind myself it really happened, that I was almost another missing person poster, another abandoned car on Highway 93. Or maybe because in one frame, when we passed under a light, you can see him watching me in the rearview mirror with this expression of absolute calm, like he'd already decided exactly how the night was going to end. The clock on my dashboard read 11:47 p.m. when we pulled into the rest area, just outside of Portland that night in late August. My wife Jessica and I had been driving for almost 6 hours straight, coming back from her sister's wedding in Seattle. And we both desperately needed to stretch our legs and grab something from the vending machines. The place was surprisingly busy for that time of night. Maybe 15 or 20 cars scattered throughout the parking lot, most of them dark with people probably sleeping inside. The overhead lights cast these weird orange pools across the asphalt, leaving huge patches of darkness between them. I remember thinking how the lighting made everything look like an old photograph, all washed out and grainy. The rest area building itself was one of those standard concrete structures you see everywhere on the interstate, with bathrooms on both sides and a covered area in the middle, where they kept the vending machines and some weathered picnic tables. Jessica headed straight for the women's restroom while I went to check out the vending machines, digging through my pockets for quarters and dollar bills. The selection was pretty pathetic, mostly off-brand chips and candy bars that looked like they'd been sitting there since the previous year, but I wasn't feeling picky. While I was feeding wrinkled bills into the coffee machine, trying to get it to accept my money, I noticed this guy walking through the parking lot. He wasn't heading toward the building or toward any particular car, just walking between the rows of parked vehicles with this slow, deliberate pace. He had on a faded baseball cap pulled low and a dark windbreaker that seemed too heavy for the warm night. What caught my attention was how he kept stopping at each car, leaning close to the windows and cupping his hands around his eyes to peer inside. At first I figured maybe he'd forgotten where he parked or was looking for someone, but there was something methodical about the way he moved from car to car, like he was taking inventory. The coffee machine finally accepted my $3 bill, and I selected the strongest option they had, knowing I'd need the caffeine for the remaining 2 hours of driving. While the machine made these grinding and hissing noises, I kept watching the guy through the glass doors. He'd made his way to a minivan where a family appeared to be sleeping. I could see the silhouettes of child car seats in the back. The man stood there for what must have been 30 seconds, just staring through the passenger window, his breath fogging up the glass. Then he tried the door handle. Just a gentle pull at first, then a bit more forceful. When it didn't open, he moved on to the next car, a silver sedan, and did the exact same thing. My coffee dropped into the dispensing slot with a hollow thud, but I barely noticed. This wasn't someone looking for their car. This was someone looking for an unlocked door, and the realization made my chest tighten. Jessica came out of the bathroom just as I grabbed my coffee, and I immediately pulled her aside near the information board covered in faded tourist brochures. I kept my voice low and told her about the guy, nodding toward the parking lot where he was now examining a pickup truck near the edge of the lot. She squinted through the glass, watching him circle the truck twice before testing both door handles and even pushing down on the truck bed cover to see if it would give. "We need to get out of here," she whispered, gripping my arm. But here's the thing. Our car was parked in the middle row and he was systematically working his way through the lot. At the rate he was going, he'd reach our Honda Accord in maybe 5 minutes. We could either walk out there now and risk encountering him directly, or wait inside and hope he'd move past our car without incident. Neither option felt particularly safe, especially since I noticed he kept glancing toward the building every few minutes, like he was keeping track of who was inside. We decided to wait a few minutes, hoping maybe he'd get spooked or bored and leave. I pretended to study the big map of Oregon on the wall, while Jessica fumbled with her phone, trying to look casual. Through the glass, we watched him reach the row where our car was parked. He started with the RV at the end, spending extra time there, even getting down on one knee to look underneath it. Then he moved to the next car and the next. When he got to ours, my whole body tensed up. He did his usual window routine first, pressing his face against the driver's side window, then moving around to check all 4 windows. He lingered at the back seat where Jessica had left her purse partially visible under her sweater. I saw him try our door handles, front driver, front passenger, both rear doors, pulling each one twice. When none opened, he stood there for a moment, then did something that made my skin prickle. He took out his phone and appeared to take a photo of our license plate. "We're leaving right now," I said, grabbing Jessica's hand. But as we pushed through the doors, the man had positioned himself directly in the path between the building and our car, standing next to a blue SUV just 2 spaces away from ours. He was leaning against the SUV's hood, arms crossed, that baseball cap tilted just enough that I couldn't see his eyes, but I knew he was watching us. We had no choice but to walk past him. I kept Jessica on my right side, away from him, and walked as confidently as I could manage. The distance couldn't have been more than 40 feet, but it felt like walking across a football field. As we passed him, maybe 6 feet away, he spoke. "Nice night for a drive," he said, his voice gravelly and flat. We didn't respond, just kept walking. I fumbled with my keys trying to hit the unlock button, and that's when I heard footsteps behind us. Not running, just walking, but matching our pace exactly. I practically shoved Jessica into the passenger seat and jumped in on my side, immediately hitting the lock button. The man stopped right next to my door, close enough that I could see the stubble on his jaw and a scar that ran from his left ear down to his neck. He tapped on my window with his knuckle, 3 slow knocks. I started the engine, putting the car in reverse, but he placed his palm flat against the window and said something I couldn't make out through the glass. Jessica was digging through the glove compartment for her pepper spray, her breathing quick and shallow. I began backing out slowly, and the man actually walked alongside the car, keeping his hand on the window, leaving greasy smudges on the glass. That's when I noticed another detail that made everything worse. There was a second person, a woman with stringy blonde hair, standing by a beat-up Chevrolet van 3 rows over, watching everything unfold. She had this blank expression, but she was definitely with him, definitely part of whatever this was. I shifted into drive and started heading toward the exit, but the man stepped directly in front of our car. Just stood there in the middle of the lane, hands at his sides, blocking our path. I honked the horn, hoping the noise would attract attention from other travelers, but nobody emerged from any of the parked cars. The woman had started walking toward us too, approaching from Jessica's side. They were trying to box us in. I revved the engine, inching forward, making it clear I would run him down if necessary. He didn't move. Jessica was on her phone with 911, her voice shaky but clear as she described our location. The man took a step closer, now maybe 2 feet from our bumper, and reached into his windbreaker pocket. I didn't wait to see what he was reaching for. I yanked the wheel hard to the right, drove up over the grass median that separated the parking rows, my car's undercarriage scraping against the curb. The woman had to jump back to avoid getting clipped by our mirror. We shot across the grass and bounced hard onto the exit lane, the coffee I'd bought splashing all over the dashboard. In the rearview mirror, I saw the man running toward the van while the woman was already getting in on the passenger side. They were going to follow us. The exit merged onto Interstate 84, and I floored it, pushing our car up to 90 miles per hour, weaving between the few trucks that were on the road at that hour. Jessica was still on with the 911 dispatcher, trying to describe the van that was now accelerating behind us, its headlights getting closer. The dispatcher said state police were being notified, but the nearest unit was 15 minutes away. 15 minutes feels like a lifetime when someone is chasing you down a dark highway. The van was old, but apparently had a decent engine because it kept pace with us, staying about 3 car lengths behind no matter how fast I drove. They followed us for maybe 8 miles, through 2 exits, never trying to ram us or run us off the road, just staying right there, letting us know they were there. Then, at mile marker 47, something strange happened. A semi-truck in the right lane suddenly moved into the left lane, cutting off the van and forcing it to brake hard. I don't know if that trucker saw what was happening and decided to help, or if it was just coincidental timing, but it gave us a crucial few seconds of distance. I saw an exit approaching, Troutdale, and made a split-second decision. I waited until the last possible moment, then cut across 2 lanes and took the exit at probably 60 miles per hour, our tires screaming against the pavement. The van couldn't make the turn from the left lane and went sailing past the exit. I took the first right, then a left, then pulled into a well-lit gas station that had several cars parked outside. We sat there in the parking lot, engine running, watching the road for 20 minutes. Jessica was still talking to the dispatcher, giving them updates. The van never appeared. Maybe they gave up. Maybe they took the next exit and couldn't find us. Or maybe that trucker's intervention had been enough to make them reconsider. The state police finally arrived at the gas station. 2 officers in a patrol car who took our statements and examined the greasy handprints still visible on my window. They told us there had been 3 similar incidents at rest areas along I-84 in the past month. Couples or solo travelers being approached by a man and woman team who were suspected of robbing people or worse. One traveler had reported being followed for 30 miles before losing them in Portland traffic. Another had their car broken into while they slept, only waking up when the woman was halfway into their back seat. The officers took photos of the handprints and wrote down everything we could remember about the van and the 2 people. The man's scar, the woman's blonde hair, the faded Chevrolet van that looked like it was from the early 2000s, maybe brown or dark green, hard to tell under those orange rest area lights. They said they'd increase patrols at the rest areas, but admitted these people seemed to know exactly when to show up and when to disappear. We drove the remaining 2 hours home in silence, Jessica periodically checking the side mirror, and me gripping the steering wheel hard enough to make my knuckles ache. Every set of headlights behind us made my pulse spike. Every van on the road got a long, careful look. When we finally pulled into our driveway in Beaverton at almost 3 a.m., we sat in the car for a full minute before getting out, just listening and watching. The next day, I found 3 small scratches on the driver's side door handle, where the man had tried to force it open, marks I hadn't noticed in the darkness. Jessica found something else. Stuck under the windshield wiper was a folded piece of paper with our license plate number written on it, and below that, in different handwriting, the word "later." We turned it over to the police, but nothing ever came of it. That was 14 months ago. We still don't stop at rest areas at night, and probably never will again. We'd rather risk running out of gas than park in one of those lots after dark. Last spring, I was driving from Illinois to visit my sister in Montana for her wedding. I'm a freelance graphic designer, 32 years old, and I'd been putting in crazy hours to clear my schedule for the trip. The drive was supposed to be my chance to decompress, just me and my playlist and the open road. I'd done long drives before. Loved them, actually. That feeling of freedom you get when it's just you and the highway stretching out ahead. I left on a Wednesday morning around 5. Figured I'd make good time before traffic picked up. My Honda Accord was packed with wedding stuff my sister had asked me to bring, plus my camera gear because she wanted me to take some candid shots during the reception. Everything started out perfectly normal, just another road trip. The first time I noticed the black Chevy Tahoe was at a gas station just outside of Iowa, maybe 4 hours into my drive. Nothing special about it, really, just a newer model with tinted windows and Illinois plates like mine. I was filling up my tank, grabbing some beef jerky and a Red Bull for the road, when I saw it pull in behind me at the pumps. The driver stayed in the car, which wasn't weird or anything. Lots of people do that. I went inside to pay, used the restroom, bought my snacks. Probably took about 10 minutes total. When I came back out, the Tahoe was still there, still running. Hadn't moved to a different pump even though several were open. I didn't think much of it, got in my car and pulled back onto Interstate 80. About 20 minutes later, I checked my rearview mirror and there it was. Maybe 3 cars behind me, maintaining the exact same speed. I drive for another 2 hours, stop at a rest area near the Nebraska border to stretch my legs and grab a sandwich from the vending machines. The parking lot's pretty empty, maybe a dozen cars scattered around, mostly semis taking their mandatory breaks. I park near the main building, walk inside, and while I'm standing there trying to decide between a turkey club or ham and cheese, I glance out the window. That black Tahoe is pulling into the lot real slow, like the driver's looking for the perfect spot. It parks way in the back, far from any other vehicles, and again, nobody gets out. Can't see through those tinted windows, but I get this weird prickle on the back of my neck. You know that feeling when you realize someone might be watching you. I tell myself I'm being paranoid, that thousands of people are driving west today. It's a major interstate, of course I'm gonna see the same cars multiple times. By the time I reach North Platte, Nebraska, I need gas again, and I'm starting to feel genuinely uneasy. I deliberately take an exit that doesn't have any signs for gas stations, just a small town exit. Figure I'll find something local. There's a little Shell station about a mile off the highway, one of those old-fashioned ones with just 2 pumps and a tiny convenience store that probably hasn't been renovated since the 90s. I'm standing there pumping gas, and I kid you not, 5 minutes later that Tahoe rolls past the station, real slow, like they're lost or looking for something. It doesn't stop, just cruises by. But then I see it do a U-turn at the intersection ahead and come back, pulling into the parking lot of a boarded-up restaurant across the street. This time I can see there's definitely someone in the driver's seat, just a dark silhouette, but they're facing my direction. Just sitting there, engine running. My heart's really pounding now, and I'm trying to remember everything I've ever heard about what to do in situations like this. I finish pumping gas as fast as I can, practically throw my credit card at the reader, and get back in my car. Instead of heading back to the interstate, I drive further into town, taking random turns, going through a residential neighborhood where kids are playing basketball in driveways and people are watering their lawns. I circle around for maybe 15 minutes, taking rights and lefts with no pattern, checking my mirrors constantly. No black Tahoe. I finally make my way back to I-80, merge onto the highway, and for about an hour I actually start to relax. Maybe I really was being paranoid. Maybe it was just some weird coincidence. Maybe they were lost tourists or something. The sun's starting to set, painting everything this gorgeous orange-gold color, and I'm actually enjoying the drive again, singing along to my music. Then I see the headlights in my mirror, coming up fast in the left lane. Cars pass me all the time. I'm only going about 5 over the speed limit, so at first I don't think anything of it. But as the vehicle gets closer, I recognize that distinctive grille, those tinted windows, and my whole body goes rigid. The Tahoe passes me, gets about 3 car lengths ahead, and then slows down to match my speed exactly. When I slow down to 70, it slows down. When I speed up to 85, pushing my little Honda harder than I usually do, it speeds up too. We're playing this horrible game of synchronized driving, and there's hardly anyone else on this stretch of highway, just us and the occasional semi. After about 10 minutes of this, the Tahoe suddenly hits its brakes, forcing me to brake hard too. Then it moves into my lane right in front of me and starts going 55 in a 75 zone. I try to pass on the left, but as soon as I signal and start to merge, the Tahoe swerves into that lane too, blocking me. I fall back, try the right lane, same thing happens. We're crawling along at 55 and I can see cars coming up behind us, getting frustrated, honking as they pass. One guy in a pickup even rolls down his window to yell something at both of us. Probably thinks we're traveling together or having some kind of road rage incident. The Tahoe's hazard lights suddenly start flashing on off in this deliberate pattern, like they're trying to send me a message. Then the driver's side window rolls down just a crack and an arm comes out. Just the forearm and hand, pale white against the black vehicle, and it's making this slow beckoning motion, like they want me to pull over. Every instinct in my body is screaming at me not to stop, that whatever this person wants, it's not good. I grab my phone from the cup holder, trying to call 911 while keeping my eyes on the road, but my signal keeps dropping out here in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska. The exit sign says there's a town called Elm Creek coming up in 2 miles, and I make a split-second decision. Without signaling, I stay behind the Tahoe until the very last second. Then I yank my wheel hard to the right, tires squealing as I barely make the exit ramp. The Tahoe tries to follow, but they're going too fast and miss it. I can hear their brakes screaming as they try to stop. I floor it down the exit ramp, blow through the stop sign at the bottom, and turn into the first populated place I see, which turns out to be a pilot truck stop. It's busy, thank God, lots of people around, bright lights everywhere. I park right in front of the main doors where there's cameras and foot traffic, and I run inside, my legs shaking so bad I can barely walk straight. I find an employee, this older woman named Dottie according to her name tag, and I just word vomit everything that's been happening. She takes one look at my face and immediately calls the state police, lets me sit in the employee break room while we wait. About 20 minutes later, a state trooper shows up, Officer Daniels, this young guy who looks like he's maybe been on the job for a year or two. He takes my statement, writes everything down, asks for the license plate number of the Tahoe, which I realize I never got because I was too panicked to think straight. He radios it in anyway, gives a description, tells other troopers to keep an eye out for a black Tahoe with Illinois plates acting suspicious. We walk out to the parking lot together so he can check my car, make sure nothing's been tampered with, and that's when we both see it. There's a piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper, folded once, nothing written on the outside. Officer Daniels puts on gloves before touching it, unfolds it carefully, and there's just one line written in blue pen, neat handwriting. "You remind me of her, especially when you're scared." That's it, nothing else, no signature, no other markings. The officer bags it as evidence, asks me if I know what this might mean, who her could be, but I have no idea. I don't know anyone who drives a black Tahoe, don't have any stalkers that I'm aware of. Officer Daniels escorts me to a motel right next to the truck stop, says it's better if I don't continue driving tonight, especially since we don't know where the Tahoe went. The motel manager, after hearing what happened, gives me a room on the second floor with a view of the parking lot and my car. I barely sleep, keep getting up to peek through the curtains, checking if that black SUV is out there. Around 3 in the morning, I hear a vehicle with a deep engine rumble cruise slowly through the parking lot. I practically crawl to the window, peer through the gap in the curtains, and there it is. The Tahoe, moving between the rows of parked cars like it's searching for something. It stops for a long moment right in front of where my Honda is parked. Just sits there idling, headlights off, and then continues on, disappearing back onto the road. I call 911 immediately, but by the time the police arrive, it's long gone. No trace except for my trembling voice describing what I saw. The next morning, Officer Daniels comes back with another trooper, and they've actually found something. There were 2 other reports from women driving alone on I-80 in the past month. Same black Tahoe, same terrifying pattern of following and trying to get them to pull over. One woman from Minnesota said the vehicle followed her for over 300 miles before she managed to lose it at a busy rest stop. The other from Missouri said the driver had actually gotten out at a gas station and approached her car, but she'd locked her doors and laid on the horn until other people came over to help. The description she gave was chilling. White male, probably mid-40s, completely average looking except for his eyes, which she said were flat and empty, like looking at a mannequin. Officer Daniels tells me they're taking this very seriously now, that it's part of a pattern, and they'll have extra patrols on I-80 for the next few weeks. He offers to have a trooper follow me to the Wyoming border, make sure I get there safely. I take him up on that offer immediately, and around noon, I'm back on the road with a state police cruiser behind me. The drive to Wyoming is uneventful, but I'm still jumpy, checking every black vehicle, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The trooper follows me all the way to Cheyenne, flashes his lights goodbye when we cross the state line, and I actually start crying from relief. I made it to my sister's wedding, told everyone about what happened, and my brother-in-law's friend, who's a detective in Chicago, did some digging when I got back. Turns out there was a man arrested 2 months later for attempted kidnapping in Indiana, drove a black Tahoe with Illinois plates. They found notebooks in his car with detailed notes about dozens of women he'd followed on various interstates, descriptions of their cars, their routines, where they stopped. One page had my license plate number and the words, "Wedding in Montana, traveling alone resembles Catherine." I never found out who Catherine was, but I haven't taken a road trip alone since then, and I probably never will. The Ford Explorer was running on fumes when we saw him standing on the shoulder of Route 50, thumbs stretched toward the endless Kansas highway. Brandon and I had been driving for 12 hours straight, taking turns at the wheel, making our way from Boston to California for his sister's wedding in 2017. We were both 26, had just quit our jobs at the same accounting firm, and figured a cross-country road trip would help us decompress before Brandon started his new position in San Francisco. I had all my belongings in storage, nothing but time on my hands, and we'd loaded the Explorer with camping gear, junk food, and enough Red Bull to fuel a small army. The wedding was still a week away, and we wanted to take the scenic route, see the heartland, maybe find ourselves or whatever people do on these trips. That Sunday afternoon, about 40 miles east of Dodge City, the guy by the road looked harmless enough. Just another traveler needing help, we thought. He was maybe mid-30s, clean cut, wearing faded jeans and a plain gray t-shirt that had seen better days, with a worn military-style backpack sitting at his feet. The late afternoon sun painted everything gold, making the wheat fields on either side of the highway glow like something out of a photography magazine. Brandon was behind the wheel, and I saw him checking the rearview mirror, already easing off the gas before he asked what I thought about giving the guy a lift. We'd been talking all day about taking chances, doing things that pushed us out of our comfort zones, living stories worth telling. A hitchhiker seemed like a small, manageable adventure, something our coworkers back in Boston would never believe we actually did. When we pulled onto the shoulder, the man jogged over with this enormous, grateful smile that made us feel like heroes. He introduced himself as Tommy, explained his car had broken down near Garden City, and he was trying to reach his brother's place in Colorado Springs. His handshake was solid. He looked us both in the eye, and he must have thanked us a dozen times before tossing his backpack in and sliding into the back seat. The first 20 minutes were perfectly normal, even pleasant. Tommy asked about our trip, laughed at Brandon's terrible jokes about Kansas being flatter than his ex-girlfriend's singing voice, and shared a bag of beef jerky he pulled from his pack. He told us he worked construction, mostly residential stuff, traveling wherever the jobs took him. His brother had apparently landed him a gig with a renovation company in Colorado. Good money, steady work. He knew a lot about the area, pointed out old grain elevators, told us about the Dust Bowl history, even recommended a diner in Dodge City that supposedly had the best chicken fried steak west of the Mississippi. I remember thinking we'd gotten lucky, picked up someone actually interesting instead of some weirdo. Brandon had turned the music back up. We were all just cruising along, windows cracked to let in that dry prairie air that smelled like grass and diesel fuel. Then Tommy asked Brandon about the accounting firm, specifically mentioning Thornton and Associates by name. We hadn't told him where we worked, just that we'd quit accounting jobs. Brandon caught my eye in the rearview mirror for a split second but played it cool, said yeah, that was the place. Tommy nodded like it made perfect sense, then asked if old man Thornton still kept that photo of his sailboat on his desk, the one he bought after his divorce. That detail made my chest tighten because it was absolutely true. Mr. Thornton had that exact photo, talked about that boat constantly, but it wasn't something you'd know unless you'd been in his office. Brandon's knuckles went white on the steering wheel, but he managed to laugh, asked Tommy if he knew someone who worked there. Tommy just smiled, said he knew lots of people, had a gift for remembering things about folks. Then he turned to me and asked how my mother was doing after her hip surgery. My mother had her hip replaced 3 weeks before this trip, and I'd only told Brandon and my immediate family about it. She lived in a small town in New Hampshire, not on social media, kept to herself mostly. There was absolutely no way this random hitchhiker from Kansas would know about her surgery. I tried to keep my voice steady when I asked him what he meant, but I could hear it crack slightly. Tommy leaned forward between the front seats and I could smell his breath, coffee and something metallic like pennies. He said he'd heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd had some health troubles, hoped she was recovering well at that nice assisted living place on Birchwood Avenue. That was the exact name of her street. Brandon immediately said we needed gas, practically yanked the wheel taking the next exit, which led to some tiny town called Cimarron. The gas station was one of those old places with just 2 pumps and a convenience store that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. Brandon pulled up to the pump and we both got out, leaving Tommy in the back seat. He didn't move to follow us, just sat there scrolling through his phone like nothing was weird. Brandon whispered that we needed to get this guy out of the car right now, and I completely agreed. But when I looked back, Tommy was staring straight at us through the rear window with this completely blank expression. Not angry, not threatening, just watching. We pretended to check the tires, and Brandon suggested we could say we were taking a different route, maybe heading north instead. But when we got back in the car, before either of us could say anything, Tommy mentioned it would be a shame to miss the wedding, especially after Brandon's sister Amanda had specifically requested he bring a date. Brandon had been single for 2 years and definitely wasn't bringing anyone to the wedding. His sister's name was Amanda though, and Tommy knowing that made Brandon's jaw clench so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. We got back on Route 50 and the atmosphere in the car had completely shifted. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky this sick orange color that reminded me of a bruise. Tommy had gone quiet in the back seat, but I could feel him there, this presence that made the air feel thick and wrong. Every few seconds I'd check the side mirror and catch glimpses of him, sometimes looking out the window, sometimes staring straight ahead at nothing, and sometimes looking directly at me in the reflection. About 10 miles from Dodge City, Brandon tried to take control of the situation. He announced we were actually going to stop for the night soon, get a motel room, and Tommy would need to find another ride. His voice was firm, the same tone he used in board meetings back when we thought our biggest problems were spreadsheet errors and missed deadlines. Tommy didn't respond for what felt like forever, then simply said that wouldn't work for him, that he really needed to get to Colorado Springs tonight, and he knew we weren't planning to stop until at least midnight, because Brandon had hotel reservations in Burlington that he'd made 3 days ago under his credit card ending in 4782. That's when I pulled out my phone to call 911, but Tommy immediately said that would be unfortunate for everyone, especially considering what the police might find if they searched his backpack, items that would be very difficult to explain, particularly since our fingerprints were now on them from when we'd helped load his bag into the car. I hadn't touched his backpack, and neither had Brandon. We both knew that for certain. But Tommy kept talking, his voice never changing from that calm, friendly tone, explaining how he'd been in the car for over an hour now. Plenty of time for fibers, hair, DNA to spread around. He mentioned that his cousin worked for the state police, good guy named Frank, who'd probably be very interested to hear about two men from Boston who'd picked up a hitchhiker and were now acting paranoid and aggressive. He pulled out an old flip phone, not the smartphone he'd been using earlier, and started pressing buttons like he was about to make a call. Brandon and I exchanged a look that said everything. We were trapped in a car going 70 miles per hour with someone who had planned this, whatever this was. We drove through Dodge City in complete silence, passing fast food restaurants and gas stations lit up like beacons in the growing darkness. Normal people were living their normal lives, completely unaware that two guys from Boston were being held hostage in their own vehicle by a soft-spoken hitchhiker who somehow knew everything about us. Tommy had put both phones away and was now humming some tune I didn't recognize, occasionally giving us directions like he was a GPS. Take the bypass here, stay on 50 West, don't miss the turn. He knew exactly where we were going even though we'd never told him our route. At one point, a state trooper passed us going the opposite direction, and I swear Tommy waved at him like they were old friends. He then casually mentioned that Brandon's mother, Dorothy, still lived at that nice split-level house in Brookline, the one with the red mailbox and the dogwood tree in the front yard that Brandon's father had planted before he died. Brandon's father had been dead for 15 years, and that tree was something only family would know about. The really sick part was how Tommy started talking about our futures, not our pasts. He told Brandon that the job in San Francisco wasn't going to work out, that his new boss Kevin would be arrested for embezzlement in 6 months, and Brandon would be caught up in the investigation even though he was innocent. He knew the boss's name was Kevin. Then he turned to me and said my storage unit in Somerville, Unit 247B, had already been broken into, that my grandmother's jewelry was gone, along with my laptop with all my photos from college. He described items I'd never told anyone about. A wooden music box my ex-girlfriend had given me, my father's old military jacket with the cigarette burn on the left sleeve, even the box of love letters I'd kept from high school that I thought I'd thrown away years ago but had actually hidden in that storage unit. He rattled off these details while staring out at the empty Kansas highway, voice never rising above that conversational tone, like we were three buddies on a road trip sharing memories. Finally, about 30 miles past Dodge City, Tommy told us to take the next exit, some unmarked dirt road that led into absolute darkness. Brandon started to protest, but Tommy cut him off, said this was where he needed to get out, that his brother was meeting him at an old grain elevator about 2 miles down this road. There were no lights anywhere, just our headlights cutting through the black, illuminating nothing but dirt and dead grass. My whole body was screaming that this was wrong, that we were being led somewhere isolated where nobody would hear us, where nobody would find us. But Brandon turned onto that road anyway because what choice did we have? Tommy knew where our families lived, where we worked, details about our entire lives that he could use for God knows what. The Explorer's headlights swept across an abandoned grain elevator, one of those massive concrete towers that looked like a tombstone against the night sky. Tommy told Brandon to stop the car, and when he did, the silence was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Tommy grabbed his backpack and opened the door, letting in cold air that smelled like dust and rotting grain. He stepped out, then leaned back into the car, and for the first time since we'd picked him up, his smile looked different. Not threatening exactly, but knowing, like he was in on some cosmic joke we'd never understand. He thanked us for the ride, said we'd been very helpful, more than we could possibly know. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 driver's licenses, Brandon's and mine. The same licenses that were in our wallets, except when we checked, ours were still there. These were duplicates, perfect copies down to the smallest detail, but the issue dates were different. They were dated 3 years in the future, 2020, from states we'd never lived in. Mine was from Texas, Brandon's from Florida. Tommy placed them on the back seat, very carefully, like they were fragile. He said we might need these someday, that we'd know when the time was right, and that when that day came, we should remember that he'd been trying to help us all along. Then he walked into the darkness toward the grain elevator and simply vanished. Not gradually disappearing into the shadows, but there 1 second and gone the next, like he'd stepped through an invisible door. Brandon threw the Explorer in reverse and we got out of there so fast the tires kicked up a dust cloud that followed us back to the highway. We drove straight through to California without stopping except for gas, taking turns sleeping while the other drove. Those duplicate licenses sitting in a Ziploc bag in the glove compartment, because we were too scared to throw them away, but couldn't stand looking at them. We never talked about calling the police. What would we even say? When we finally got to San Francisco, everything Tommy had said started coming true. Brandon's storage unit had been robbed exactly as described, though the police said it happened weeks ago before we'd even met Tommy. Brandon started his job but quit after 3 months when he heard rumors about his boss being investigated by the FBI. The strangest part came in late 2019 when Brandon called me from Florida. He'd moved there suddenly for a job opportunity he couldn't explain. I was living in Austin by then, working for a tech startup I'd never planned on joining. We compared our new licenses to those duplicates Tommy had left, and the addresses matched perfectly down to the apartment numbers. We still don't know who Tommy was or how he knew what he knew, but sometimes I think about what he said about helping us, and I wonder if picking him up that day wasn't our mistake but our salvation from something worse we'll never understand. Most people don't understand what true isolation feels like until they're driving through rural Pennsylvania at 2 in the morning. I was 34 then, managing a small electronics repair shop in Harrisburg, and I'd just gotten news that my father had taken a bad fall at his cabin near Lake Wallenpaupack. The doctors said he was stable, but I needed to get there, and waiting until morning wasn't an option. I threw some clothes in a bag, grabbed my thermos of coffee, and hit the road in my beat-up Ford Ranger. The GPS kept trying to reroute me through the main highways, but I knew the back roads would cut an hour off my time. That decision still haunts me, especially when I drive at night and see taillights where they shouldn't be. The Susquehanna River has dozens of old bridges crossing it, but the one on Route 147 near Millersburg is different. It's nearly a mile long, narrow enough that 2 trucks passing each other have to slow down, and the metal framework creates these shadows that dance in your headlights like living things. I'd crossed it maybe 50 times over the years visiting Dad, always during the day, and even then it gave me an uneasy feeling. The locals have stories about it, mostly about jumpers and accidents, but nothing that would make you avoid it completely. That night though, with no moon and a thick fog rolling off the river, the bridge looked like it was floating in pure darkness. My headlights could only penetrate about 30 feet ahead, and the yellow paint on the road seemed to glow with this sickly color that made everything feel wrong. About halfway across, my headlights caught something that made me ease off the gas. A silver sedan, maybe a Camry or a Accord, was stopped right in the middle of the bridge with its hazard lights blinking in this slow, methodical rhythm. The car was positioned at an angle, taking up most of both lanes, and I could see the driver's door was slightly open, interior light casting a weak glow into the fog. My first thought was mechanical trouble, or maybe someone had run out of gas. People break down in the worst spots sometimes, and this poor soul was probably terrified being stuck on this narrow bridge in the middle of the night. I slowed down to about 10 miles per hour, pulling slightly to the right to give myself room to pass if needed. But as I got closer, maybe 50 feet away, I noticed something that made me grip the steering wheel tighter. The car's engine was still running. I could see the exhaust fumes mixing with the fog, and the headlights were on, pointing straight ahead into nothing. Through the rear window, I could make out at least 3 heads, maybe 4, all facing forward and completely still. They weren't moving at all, not turning to look at my approaching truck, not shifting in their seats. Nothing. Just sitting there like mannequins while their hazard lights kept that steady, hypnotic beat. I reached over and made sure my doors were locked, then turned my radio off completely. The silence made everything feel heavier, more real. That's when the passenger door opened, slow and deliberate, and someone stepped out. Then another door, then another. 4 people emerged from that sedan, and the way they moved made every instinct in my body scream danger. They didn't hurry, didn't stumble or seem confused like you'd expect from people with car trouble. They moved with this eerie coordination, spreading out across the width of the bridge in a line, facing my truck. All of them were wearing regular clothes, jeans, hoodies, jackets, but in the mix of fog and headlights, I couldn't make out their faces clearly. They just stood there about 40 feet away, not waving for help, not calling out, not doing anything except blocking my path. My foot hovered between the brake and gas pedal while my mind raced through options. The bridge had no shoulder, just a narrow walkway with a railing, and trying to squeeze past them would mean getting within arm's reach. Behind me was at least half a mile of bridge, and doing a 3-point turn here would leave me vulnerable for too long. I flashed my high beams twice, the universal signal for move, but they didn't react, not even a flinch. Then one of them, the tallest one standing second from the left, raised his arm and pointed directly at me. Not at my truck, but through the windshield, right at me. The others started walking forward, still in that perfect line, taking these measured steps like they'd rehearsed it. My dad always told me that in a situation where you can't fight and you can't hide, you create chaos and run. I slammed my hand on the horn, holding it down, and the sound exploded across the bridge, echoing off the metal beams. At the same time, I threw the truck in reverse and floored it, my tires squealing against the wet pavement. The backup lights illuminated the bridge behind me in harsh white light, and that's when I saw it. Another car, dark blue or black, had pulled onto the bridge behind me, maybe 200 feet back, its lights off but engine running. Driving in reverse at 40 miles per hour on a narrow bridge in thick fog is insane, but I didn't have a choice. My truck's engine was screaming, the transmission protesting the abuse, but I kept my foot down, using the bridge's railing as my guide. In my mirrors, I could see the 4 figures had broken their formation and were running after me, not frantically, but with these long, purposeful strides. The car behind me suddenly flipped on its high beams, blinding me through my rear window, and started moving forward to close the gap. I was trapped between them, doing mental math on whether I could ram through the car behind me if I built up enough speed. The bridge's metal joints made my truck bounce and sway dangerously close to the railing. Then I remembered something. About a quarter mile from where I started reversing, there was a maintenance pullout, just a small indent in the bridge where workers could park equipment. It would barely fit my truck, but it might give me enough room to turn around. The pullout appeared in my backup lights like a miracle. Just a rusty metal platform jutting out 8 feet from the main bridge deck. I cranked the wheel hard, feeling the truck's right side scrape against the railing as I forced it into the tiny space. The 4 runners were maybe 60 feet away now, and in my headlights I finally got a clear look at their faces. They were young, maybe mid-20s, but their expressions were completely blank, eyes focused but showing nothing. No anger, no excitement, just this terrifying emptiness. I shifted into drive, cut the wheel all the way left and punched it. The truck lurched forward, tires smoking, and I had to thread the needle between the approaching figures and the bridge railing. One of them, a woman with her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, reached out as I passed, and her hand slammed against my passenger window hard enough to leave a greasy handprint. I felt the truck clip something. Maybe her, maybe one of the others. But I didn't stop to find out. The silver sedan was still sitting there with its hazards on, but now all its doors were wide open, interior lights creating pools of yellow in the fog. As I accelerated past it, I glimpsed inside. Fast food wrappers on the floor, a phone charger dangling from the outlet, a baseball cap on the dashboard. Normal stuff, the kind of things you'd see in anyone's car, which somehow made it worse. These weren't wild-eyed maniacs or drug addicts. They looked like people you'd pass at the grocery store. My speedometer hit 70 as I raced toward the end of the bridge, my truck shaking from the speed and the uneven surface. In my rearview mirror, I could see headlights. Both cars were now pursuing me, and they were gaining. The bridge ended in a sharp right turn onto Route 11, and I nearly rolled the truck, taking it at 50. The tires screamed in protest, and I felt the left side lift slightly before slamming back down. For 20 minutes, I drove like a madman through those dark countryside roads, taking random turns, doubling back, doing everything I could to lose them. Every set of headlights behind me made my chest tighten until they turned off or passed by. I finally pulled into a 24-hour gas station near Liverpool, parking right in front where the cameras and lights were. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold my phone steady to call 911. The dispatcher sounded skeptical when I described what happened, but she said she'd send a unit to check the bridge. I sat in that gas station parking lot for 3 hours, drinking bitter coffee and watching every car that pulled in before I finally felt safe enough to continue to my dad's place. The police called me the next afternoon. They'd found nothing on the bridge except some skid marks and that greasy handprint on my truck, which they photographed but said proved nothing except that someone had touched my vehicle. I did some research afterward, spending hours on local forums and news archives. Turns out, there had been 3 similar incidents on that bridge in the past 18 months, drivers reporting being boxed in by multiple vehicles and people, though nobody had been hurt badly enough to make major news. The state police apparently knew about it, but classified it as attempted robbery, even though nothing was ever stolen from anyone who reported it. One truck driver posted that he'd blown right through them, and they scattered. But most people had stories like mine. Dangerous escapes and close calls with no explanation for what these people actually wanted. The pattern was always the same. Late night, foggy conditions, that same silver sedan with hazard lights and a second vehicle blocking retreat. A retired cop on one forum suggested it might be some kind of initiation ritual or gang thing, but that didn't explain the blank expressions, the coordination, or why they'd risk their lives standing on a narrow bridge at night. My dad recovered fine, and I visited him plenty after that, but I never took that bridge again. I'd add an extra hour to my drive going around through Duncannon instead. The thing that still bothers me, what keeps me up sometimes when I'm driving late at night, isn't just what happened. It's what didn't happen. They had me trapped, outnumbered, completely at their mercy for those few seconds. They could have rushed my truck, broken the windows, done whatever they'd planned. But they didn't. They just stood there with those empty faces, pointing, walking forward in formation like they had all the time in the world, like they knew something I didn't. I still check traffic reports for that bridge sometimes, and every few months there's another incident. A near miss, an abandoned car, someone calling in about suspicious figures in the fog. The police keep saying it's unrelated events, coincidences, maybe pranks. But I know what I saw that night, and I know there are people out there, maybe watching that bridge right now, waiting for the next foggy night when someone decides to take the shortcut. It happened during a road trip I took with my girlfriend, Claire. We were heading back home after visiting her family, trying to make good time before nightfall. Our gas tank dipped lower than expected, and instead of waiting for the next big station, we took the first exit that promised fuel. That's how we ended up on a narrow 2-lane road leading to a place I had never even heard of before. At first, I figured it would just be one of those small towns with a single gas pump, maybe a diner, and nothing else. But the deeper we drove in, the quieter it became, almost like the town was holding its breath. The first thing I noticed was how still everything looked. Houses stood in neat rows, but not a single car passed us. The storefronts looked old, with hand-painted signs that hadn't been touched in years. The gas station we thought we'd find never appeared, just boarded-up windows and a cracked sidewalk that seemed to stretch forever. Claire kept pointing out how not even a dog or bird moved around. For a moment, I convinced myself the town was abandoned, maybe one of those forgotten places left behind when highways were built elsewhere. Then, as I slowed near an intersection, I saw a curtain shift in the second-floor window of a pale yellow house. It was quick, like someone was peeking and didn't want me to notice. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was just tired from driving, but Claire grabbed my arm and whispered that she saw someone too. That's when I caught another glimpse. A figure, just barely visible, standing behind a screen door across the street. The outline stayed there, motionless, until our car crept forward, and then the door quietly closed. We tried to laugh it off, telling each other it was probably just some curious locals, but the deeper we went, the stranger it got. Every time I let the car roll slower, there was always someone new appearing. A man in overalls standing at the edge of his porch. An older woman leaning against a lamppost with her eyes fixed on us. None of them waved, none of them spoke. They only stared. And when I pressed the gas to speed up, I could see in the rearview mirror that they stepped out farther into the road, as if they wanted to block us if we decided to turn back. I told Claire to keep her eyes forward and not stare, thinking maybe we were just making the locals uncomfortable, but she kept squeezing her hands together on her lap, mumbling that she didn't like the way they all just appeared so suddenly. I agreed, though I didn't want to scare her more than she already was. The town felt like a stage, and we were driving straight through the middle while everyone else stayed in the shadows, waiting for their cue. The silence outside was so heavy that even the sound of our tires crunching over gravel seemed too loud. At one point, we passed what looked like an old grocery store. Its windows were covered in grime, but I swear I saw faces pressed against the glass, just faint outlines in the dirt. When we rolled past, they didn't step outside like the others. We just knew they were watching from behind the filthy panes. I can't explain it properly, but the way they moved as a group, following us with their heads at the exact same pace, made my chest tighten. Claire leaned closer to me and whispered that we should leave as soon as we could, even if it meant burning the last drops of gas. The problem was, the road through the town didn't loop the way I thought it would. It twisted between more houses, then dipped downhill past a row of shuttered buildings. Every turn felt like it was designed to keep us inside longer. I slowed once at a stop sign that leaned crooked on a rusted pole, and as soon as I did, a young boy appeared at the crosswalk. He didn't cross the street. He just stood there barefoot staring at the car, his arms hanging stiff at his sides. Behind him, two men stepped out from an alley, both in dark jackets, both staring without blinking. I pressed the gas harder than I should have, the car jerking forward, and the boy didn't move until we were inches away. He stepped back calmly, not flinching, not even surprised. In the rear view, I saw the two men walking into the road, and then more shapes began pouring out of doorways and porches behind us. It wasn't chaotic, it was methodical, almost rehearsed. They weren't chasing us, but they were making it clear we couldn't stop, not even for a second. By then, my mouth was dry, and Claire kept saying under her breath, "Don't stop, don't stop, don't stop." The road finally curved toward what looked like the edge of town, but it wasn't a clean exit. A blinking traffic light swung above the intersection, the only sound breaking the silence besides our engine. As I slowed to check which way to turn, a line of people emerged from both sidewalks. Men, women, even children, standing shoulder to shoulder across the street. They didn't run, didn't yell, just formed a wall of bodies staring at us. Claire let out a choked sound, begging me to keep going. There was no other option. I pressed the horn once, hoping they'd scatter. No one moved. I swerved hard, cutting onto the side of the road, bouncing over the curb and back onto the asphalt just past them. In the mirror, the group didn't chase. They simply turned their heads in unison to watch us leave. For a mile or two, I kept the pedal down, convinced they'd follow. Every shadow on the roadside looked like another figure stepping out, but none of them moved. When the buildings thinned and the open stretch of highway reappeared, Claire finally exhaled, her voice shaking as she kept repeating, "We made it out. We made it out." We didn't stop until we reached a brightly lit truck stop miles later. The place was loud and full of life, trucks pulling in, people talking, music from inside the diner. The contrast was so intense that it almost felt unreal. I told the cashier about the town we had just come from, hoping he'd know its name. He gave me a blank look and said there wasn't any town like that along the route we'd taken. He insisted the road we described was nothing but farmland and back roads that didn't lead anywhere. To this day, I still don't know what we drove through. Claire refuses to even talk about it, and if I bring it up, she shuts down completely. I've tried searching maps, retracing the route, but nothing matches what we saw. There's no record of a town in that area at all. The worst part is that sometimes, when I'm on the road late at night, I'll catch myself checking the windows of the houses I pass. And every now and then, I get the sickening feeling that somewhere, behind a curtain or a screen door, someone is still watching me. Late-night highways have a strange rhythm of their own. Radio static, the steady hum of tires, and endless stretches of nothing. By the time I pulled into that roadside motel, my body felt like it had been welded to the driver's seat. I wasn't traveling for leisure. It was a work-related errand that stretched much longer than I'd planned. The only thing I wanted was a shower and a few hours of uninterrupted sleep. The place I found wasn't much. Fluorescent sign buzzing, half the letters burned out, parking lot cracked with weeds poking through. But it was cheap, and at that hour, cheap was good enough. The front desk clerk had that vacant, scripted politeness you get from someone who's repeated the same phrases too many times. She handed me a brass key with a chipped plastic tag, room number scratched into it with something sharp. My room was on the ground floor, close to the lot. I parked right in front of the door, grateful that unloading wouldn't take more than 2 trips. The air smelled faintly of gasoline mixed with damp pavement. Everything about the place screamed transience. Guests who came, stayed one night, and vanished by morning. As I stepped out to grab my bag, I noticed a van idling just a few spaces away. Its headlights cut straight across the cracked pavement, flooding the front of my room in harsh white light. The engine purred steadily, a low vibration you could feel in your chest more than hear. At first, I figured someone had just pulled in and was getting their bearings. But when I bent down to pull my duffel from the back seat, I could feel the beam fixed squarely on me, like it wasn't an accident. The odd thing was how deliberate it looked. The van was parked at an angle, not facing the office or an exit, but perfectly aligned with my door. No one stepped out. No window rolled down, no sign of movement inside. Just that relentless glow, engine refusing to quit. I tried to shrug it off. Maybe someone waiting for another guest, maybe delivery, maybe anything. But the longer it sat there, the more that explanation felt like an excuse I was feeding myself. My suitcase suddenly felt heavier, and every second I stood exposed in that light stretched longer than it should have. I carried my bag inside, but curiosity got the better of me. Through the thin curtains, I peeked back at the lot. The headlights hadn't moved an inch. The rest of the parking spaces were nearly empty, yet that van remained in the exact same spot, humming steadily. The light seeped in around the edges of the curtain, slicing the room in sharp angles. I switched on the bathroom fan to drown out the noise, but the vibration still cut through, like a mechanical pulse that refused to be ignored. I thought about calling the front desk, but the idea felt ridiculous. What would I even say? A van is staring at me? Instead, I propped a chair under the doorknob, more for peace of mind than actual security, and tried to distract myself with the TV. The remote was sticky, the channels full of static-filled local broadcasts, nothing to take my mind off the parking lot. Every few minutes, I'd give in and part the curtain again, each time hoping the van had finally gone. Each time the glare struck me right in the face, proving it hadn't budged. Eventually, I decided I couldn't just sit there wondering. I stepped outside again, trying to act casual, like I was grabbing something from my trunk. The air was cooler, still tinged with gasoline, and the van's exhaust wafted faintly in the breeze. From the corner of my eye, I thought I caught a silhouette in the driver's seat, still rigid, facing straight ahead. I didn't dare look directly, but I knew with absolute certainty that whoever was in there hadn't taken their eyes off me since I arrived. I slammed my trunk harder than I needed to, just to make some noise, some statement that I wasn't intimidated. Then I walked back to my room with deliberate steps, fighting the urge to run. The door shut with a hollow clang, and I locked it, slid the chain across, and sat on the bed. The van's engine droned on, a constant reminder that my presence there wasn't private. Every instinct told me I was being observed. Every trip from the bed to the curtain only deepened that sinking realization. Sometime after midnight, exhaustion began to win out. I must have drifted in and out of light sleep because the sound of the van's motor became part of the background, like an unwanted lullaby. Then, at one point, I woke abruptly to silence. No engine, no headlights spilling in through the curtain. My heart thumped at the sudden change. I crept to the window and pulled the fabric back just a fraction. The space where the van had been was empty, only an oil stain marking the spot. Relief washed over me for half a second, until I realized how quiet the entire lot felt, like the world was holding its breath. That quiet didn't last. A faint crunch of gravel came from somewhere near the back of the motel, slow and deliberate footsteps. I strained to hear, wishing the fan was louder to cover the sound. The steps would pause, then resume, closer each time. I killed the lights in the room and stood in the dark, trying to steady my breathing. The chain on the door suddenly felt like the only fragile barrier between me and whoever had been sitting in that van, watching. I grabbed the heaviest object in the room, an ice bucket, and clutched it like it could actually help. Minutes passed before the steps finally faded. I stayed rooted in place, waiting, not daring to move until I felt sure. Eventually, exhaustion forced me back onto the bed. I must have dozed again because when sunlight cut through the curtains, the world looked deceptively normal. The van was gone, the lot half full with new cars from overnight guests. But when I opened the door to leave, there was something on the ground, a single cigarette butt, still fresh, right in front of my doorframe. I don't smoke, and none of the rooms around me looked occupied when I peeked the night before. I checked out as quickly as I could, barely acknowledging the clerk. The drive away from that place felt longer than the 12 hours that had brought me there. To this day, I can't explain why someone sat in a van with their lights fixed on me for hours, or why they ended up walking around outside my room in the middle of the night. Maybe they were waiting for me to panic, maybe for me to leave the door unlocked, maybe worse. All I know is I'll never stop for a roadside motel again without double-checking the lot first. That night convinced me. Sometimes the walls of a room aren't what protect you. It's how quickly you get out.